The agenda for today, we have run this exact agenda for about the last 5 years, and it's based on the interest of the new principals in the academy and the recommendations of the leadership from both OASSA and OESPA. So we kind of start with what we think is the most important element of the job, and that is you've been hired as of probably July 1st. You are either new to your building, new to your school district, new to your community, or you might have even been promoted up through the ranks. You may have been a teacher leader or an assistant principal or something at a neighboring school, and you know a little bit about your school. But of course, one of the most important things to do is to get to know your stakeholders, your students, your staff, your parents, the community members, to get a sense of what their interests and needs are. We'll follow that with really a 30,000-foot view of your school, and it's titled Communicating Your Why. It's an opportunity for you to make a first impression to your staff. Of course, you only get that first staff meeting one time, and we want you to be able to establish the culture of your school and really express what it is that you believe in most about the work and your leadership as the principal in your building. Following that, we'll get down with instructional leadership. This will be the most important thing for you, is setting the tone in your school from day one about teaching and learning. And then we end the day right down at the most practical level, called Preparing for the First 100 Days. And this will be a look at what are the things that you need to consider and think about and be prepared for, so that you are ready to go on day one when those kids start coming through the door. So it's going to be a really exciting day. There's lots and lots of content. By the end of the day, you'll probably be mentally exhausted, but of course, there'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions, share information, and we're going to do a number of breakout sessions throughout the day just to give you a chance to meet your colleagues and talk a little more about the work. So to get us started this morning, I want to introduce two of my good friends and colleagues through the last few years. Katie Wagner is the principal at St. Helens High School in the St. Helens School District. Katie, I think, is beginning her 3rd year. Is that right, Katie? 3rd year as the principal at
3rd year.
Helens. Mm-hmm. She comes from, she was an assistant principal at Cleveland High School before she transitioned into the principalship at St. Helens. So she's gone through exactly what you have experienced, going to a new community, going into a new school, dealing with some pretty tough issues right off the bat. And she'll have some great insights into the work that you'll be doing. Katie also serves as the metro area rep to the Oregon Association of Secondary School Administrators. So if you're up in the Portland region, in the neighboring counties to the Portland metropolitan area, Katie will be your representative to OASSA. Joining Katie is Ryan Geary. Ryan is the principal at Grant Union High School in Grant Union School District in John Day. Ryan served on the OASSA Executive Committee as the 2A rep up until this last spring, and he's been elected to the president-elect's position. So he'll be kind of watching Maya-Lise Tolan, who's this year's president this year, and then he'll be assuming the responsibilities for 2021 as the president of OASSA. Their topic today is, again, getting to know your stakeholders. Welcome, Katie and Ryan. It's all yours.
Great.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, good morning. Like Chris introduced us, my name is Katie Wagner, and I'm excited to get to know all of you, even if it's in this virtual remote environment. I think it's so important to start with getting to know your stakeholders in our agenda for today, because when you do step into a new position, you're the new kid on the block, and you are also expected to be leading a school community, and we're in a very unique situation right now where you may be leading a brand new school community but have never met them in person. So we'll talk a little bit about that throughout the day. Ryan, do you want to share our objectives?
Sure. So again, I'm Ryan Geary, principal here at Grant Union Junior Senior High School. Glad to be here and have an opportunity to talk with you guys today. So we have 5 objectives for the day today. And so those are simply put, who are your stakeholders? Why involve your stakeholders? How to involve stakeholders in the process? How to make connection with stakeholders and keeping stakeholders involved the duration. And so as Katie mentioned, this is obviously a very unique time in all of our careers where we're starting school years and trying to make connection with stakeholders. But in an ideal world, we'd be having this conversation together in a conference room somewhere, probably over in Salem or whatever it looks like. And but as all of you guys know, a lot of things have turned to this virtual world and using the Zoom platform and so on. So, but again, excited to be here today and looking forward to talking with you guys.
So it looks like we don't have a chat room per se for us to be typing in any kind of questions. So if you do have some questions along the way, I think we're perfectly fine. If you have, we can keep this fairly informal and you can just kind of jump in and ask a question. Or if you want to jot it down, we've got some time at the end that you can ask some questions as well. We will be splitting out into breakout groups so that you can introduce each other, since this may be the first time that you are getting together as new principals in this academy format. One of the things that I love to start with, especially when I'm talking with stakeholders, is especially for the first time talking with stakeholders, is to tell a little bit of a story, because storytelling gives a little bit of insight into who we are as people and who we are as leaders, but it also intrigues people. My background is in neuroeducation, so cognitive neuroscience and psychology and language theory. And our brains are primed for stories. We listen for stories, we learn from them, we get inspired by them. And so it's a really powerful tool to make those connections, especially if you're on a digital platform. So I'll start with my story about stakeholders. As Chris mentioned, I'm starting my 3rd year at St. Helens High School. I lived in Columbia County for a year prior to getting that position. But St. Helens has a very interesting history with the leaders at the high school. I am the 11th principal in 20 years. And the year before I came on, there were 2 interim principals that following year. The year before that, the principal had been there for 4 years, but did not leave on very good terms with the staff or the district. And then before that, it had just been rolling principals, maybe every 2 to 3 years. So there wasn't a whole lot of consistency. There wasn't a whole lot of trust that was built in leaders. And so it was, the superintendent, when he wanted to talk to me about offering me the position, he invited me in. And by the end of the meeting, he said that he did not get any sleep that night, thinking that he had talked me out of accepting the position. Luckily for me, I like to take on challenges, and I jumped in with 2 feet, and it has been the best decision that I've made in my career. So it's been really powerful. So already I walked into it knowing that I was going to immediately have to start building trust with everyone that I spoke with, and recognizing that they had gone through a lot of trauma, both emotional trauma and systemic trauma, and just lots of different factors. One of the things that I noticed was that there wasn't a whole lot of cohesiveness because there had been so much turnover of leadership. Every 2 or 3 years, it was all new initiatives, and then certain things were redesigned or programs were started and stopped. And so there was no continuity. And what that resulted in was a lack of pride in the building, in some of the programs, misunderstandings of what they were. And one of those situations also created a rift with our athletic boosters program. And for some of you that may be at the elementary level or even the middle school level, you may not have an athletic boosters program, but I think you'll still be able to get something good out of this. So the athletic boosters came to me during the summer that I was going to start, and they actually demanded to have a meeting with me. So I didn't have to reach out to them. They said, we have to meet with you. And it was almost, I think, probably 15 people that showed up in my office demanding to talk with me for a good 2 hours. And it was basically telling me all of these things that they wanted to do, but they never could, and almost testing me, like, how far are you going to be able to lead us? And that gave me some data and allowed me to reflect on how I was going to approach that. So as I was doing my walkthrough through the school, and I was looking at our trophy cases, they were in very hodgepodge positions throughout the school. Some of the lights were broken in them. Some of the cases themselves, the trim had been ripped off. You look at the actual trophies themselves, some of the trophies no longer had the actual label of what the trophy was for. So you had no idea what year it was or what event it was. There was a state championship trophy that was behind an honorable mention that you couldn't even see the state championship trophy. And it just clearly, things were dusty and just packed in there. And clearly there was no sense of pride. And that really tells the story of the history of the school. So I started digging into that a little bit more and reached out to our historical society in our county. And it turns out he is also a graduate of St. Helens High School. And I said, walk with me through the school. And so we start walking together, and I said, how can we really highlight the great things that our community has done over time? And so we start brainstorming all of these ideas. And it also turns out he curates historical photos from our community. So we start thinking, how can we bring up photos from the history of our high school? And he starts bringing all of these up, and he gets the boosters involved, that they're going to organize the cases by season. So now the boosters are feeling involved again, rather than being stuck, kind of in a corner. And everybody starts signing up, and we actually just passed a bond to essentially rebuild our entire school. But we were really nervous, thinking our community was not going to do that. But because we got some of these things moving and getting people involved and excited about our school and feeling pride about our school again, we were able to get enough momentum going that our community, even after passing 2 bonds recently, actually, and during the pandemic, our community actually passed our bond, and we have started the architecture process and are going to start rebuilding this year. So even just in a short amount of time, really identifying who your levers are and taking in as much of that data as possible to find out, what is your community really needing? What is it that they really value? How can you honor those core values and involve them in what's happening in the building? And then you can take that and run with it and do some pretty amazing things. So I just wanted to share that little bit of inspiration with you. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Absolutely. So as Chris kind of mentioned in the introductions, many of you are in a new position this year. You could have been in the building and worked your way through the ranks, or can be part of the new community in general. Just a little background on myself. So I actually grew up and graduated from a small community 13 miles away from where I'm currently at. That's in Prairie City, Oregon. I eventually went back and taught there for 13 years. And then, so I've been in this area, Grant County, for a long time. Actually lived here all my life. But when I moved to John Day, got this job 6 years ago, I didn't know the community as intimately as I should, as obviously I did in the Prairie City area. And so I think whatever position or where you came from, or if you work your way through the ranks or brand new in the community, you have to take the time to go out into your community to meet the people in the community, because those are your stakeholders, whether you know it or not. You don't know who they're going to be. So that was one of my main objectives when I first took this position here 6 years ago, is to essentially go door to door. I met with all the business owners. I met with our county court people, all the way, start at one end of the city and work my way through it. And I know, depending on where you're at, that's sometimes can be a pretty large geographical area, but making yourself available and getting out there to make those connections, to start developing relationships, because eventually, a lot of those people that I have met in the community 6 years ago, those are the ones that we've continued to be able to utilize as our stakeholders. They come to us with ideas. They look for partnerships with the school. And so you just never know what it's going to turn into. So my biggest recommendation is to get out there, start making connections, start talking with people, be visible, go to them, and start developing those relationships. So
we'd like you to have an opportunity to introduce yourself to each other. And we will split off into breakout groups of 3 participants for 5 minutes with a 60-second warning. And what we'd like is for you to just introduce yourself to the people in the group, a little bit about yourself, and any ideas that you have in how you plan to engage stakeholders in your new role. All right, so you should be invited into breakout rooms for 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. So the next slide, who are your stakeholders? I know it sounds like you are having some great conversations. So does anybody just want to share out who they have identified as their stakeholders, or any kind of story about their stakeholders they'd like to share?
People are amazing.
I'll go since we'll break the ice here. I've been in education 22 years, and most of it's been at the high school level. And you have to definitely have stakeholders with athletic programs in high school and to run a lot of things. And basically I'm using my experience of that to bring it to the middle school level, because you have sports, but it's not a Friday night high school football game. It's a Wednesday at 4 o'clock. But the stakeholders that I've managed to gain in our Grants Pass area has been businesses, influential parents who know other people. And then, the thing is once you start, people are going to talk, and you just continue to build where through alumni and different things like that. Fleming Middle School has a rich history. I'm going to, obviously with our issue, it's going to be a little difficult, but we're going to use technology, mailing out. I've already met with some key parents. Yesterday, I went and met with a $1 million company right down the road that we didn't even know. Me and the high school principal met with them. They're willing to give us hand sanitizer things, park benches and things like that. So just that hour meeting with him, we're getting new things at our schools. So it was pretty awesome to see. And we didn't even know it was down the road. So that's what I've started with. Our PTO was pretty, kind of like you said, you go, your booster club, didn't want to meet with people. Neither did our PTO, but I've already met with a couple parents, and we're going to do a Zoom meeting next week and see what we can do. So we're building it that way. Trust, I guess, is the biggest thing that I've learned over 22 years. If people can trust you, and word of mouth.
I think I'm out in Estacada School District, and for us, just the concept of being sure that you take the time to make those connections, have those conversations is super critical. Sometimes you feel that it may slow down the process, but in the end, it really does pay off. Taking that time to send out those surveys, to reach out, have those conversations. In the end, I think you land in a much better place where people are trusting you, they are comfortable with the decision, they know they've been a part of that. I've seen our district do that really well. So using that concept of go slow to then go fast, I think has been really important.
okay, so as you guys have both alluded to, your stakeholders in your community, there's so many, your parents, obviously, students, staff, certified, classified, confidential, out in the community, business owners, community leaders. And, as Brian alluded to, going out there making connections leads to other connections. And there's people out there that want to be involved, and you just don't know about it yet. But making yourself available and getting out there and making those connections opens the doors and leads to great things. So when you're in this process, though, if you have projects in mind, if you're going out there and getting those stakeholders, there's some questions that can help you identify your key stakeholders. in this process. So, you know, does or could the stakeholder have a fundamental impact on your school? You know, your answer was, and as you're thinking about this, should be yes. Can you clearly identify what you want from the stakeholder or the partnership, for example, that can be developed? The answer should be yes. You know, is this relationship going to be dynamic? You know, of course you want to have stakeholders that have dynamic relationship with you and your programs and your school. So the answer should be yes. Can you exist or easily replace a stakeholder? If the answer is no, then maybe that's not the right stakeholder for this project or whatever it may be. And then has the stakeholder already been identified through other relationships? So, you know, there are situations, and I'm sure that you guys can probably think of them or have seen them, where you continually use the same person over and over and over and over for whatever, for this committee or that, or whatever it could be. And that is not the idea. You want to have dynamic stakeholders that have vested interest in whatever it is that you're doing. And so, you know, it's not bad to have, you know, stakeholders involved in a couple different things, but using them over and over every time. They can't be your simple one, you know, one person go-to. So.
And I've had a similar situation where when I came to our school, our site council did not exist. We had no parent-teacher association. The level of parent involvement was essentially non-existent. And so we were having to figure out, how do we reach out to people and bring this vision to life of what involvement in our school could look like. And when you only get a couple of people that are willing to take that risk and step into that role, they do tend to fall into a lot of those categories. So even if it starts off a little bit slow in that situation, and you have one person who's involved in a lot of things, you can also capitalize on their network as well and say, hey, you're part of this group as well. Do you identify anyone that you could possibly bring to this event? And then you can start to explore different relationships by expanding your network through theirs as well. A little bit more organic. So why is it important to involve stakeholders? Really, they are the heartbeat of your school environment. Their engagement is vital to the success and improvement of your school. Just like in my story, I don't know if we would actually be able to pass a bond if we actually didn't get our community into our school and actually see what it is that we've been living with and how much support we really do need from the community. So by opening up our doors to our stakeholders and getting them back involved, we were able to make some pretty incredible changes. So it's vital to the success of the school, and it's also vital to your own personal success within the school. It gives you a sense of pride and accomplishment and being able to fulfill those connection needs that you have. And that purpose of the leadership and the gifts that you bring to your school community, it just makes it tenfold. The rewards are just tenfold if you involve them. So one thing that I've got a lot of training in trauma-informed care, and just about a year ago, I came across an article called Shifting Trauma-Informed Care to a Healing-Centered Environment. And we have a resources slide at the end that has the link to that article if you'd like to read it. But it's this idea that trauma-informed has a little bit more of a deficit connotation in that you are basically making a blanket statement that someone has experienced trauma, which may or may not be true. But you focus on the trauma part, just even in the name of that. So by shifting the vernacular to a healing-centered environment, it connotates a sense of moving forward and how we can do that together and collectively and in service to others. So this is one way that I like to shift some mindset of our stakeholders as well, so that we don't dwell in the past, but we think about how we can move forward together as a group. Another piece to the healing-centered environment is developing a clear plan to actively seek out those voices that have been historically oppressed or voiceless. So a lot of times when you come into a new position, a lot of the voices you're going to hear are the loud voices, are the ones that have been loud for a very long time. And a lot of them have very important ideas, and it may not be reflective of the entire community. So think about how you would engage those people who aren't engaged, who don't show up to the PTO meeting, who aren't involved in athletic boosters. What voice is missing out of the stakeholders that you're meeting with? And that connects to the Department of Oregon, or the Oregon Department of Education's Equity Lens. If you haven't visited that, the link is also in the resources page. But that is the equity lens that ODE runs through as they're making their strategic decisions. And I know a lot of districts have adopted an equity lens of some sort. Most ESDs also have one as well. But question number 5 of the equity lens specifically talks about how you are intentionally involving stakeholders. So if you are making some strategic investments or allocating resources, how are you making sure that you're connecting with those stakeholders intentionally so that the decisions that you make are really getting at the heart of what it is that you want to accomplish? So I think the 2 of those are very connected, and it's really important to be thoughtful and planful in making those decisions.
All right, so we have a couple of slides that are specifically addressing, stakeholder actions and some examples of what those look like. Obviously, within different groups, different things can happen as your stakeholders. But from your teachers, and I'm not going to go through all those, but we'll just kind of hit on this on a few of them. Including a group of stakeholders for teachers, using effective instructional strategies. Examining their expectations, beliefs, and practice through an equity lens, as Katie just mentioned. Participating in professional development programs to provide them with strategies for working with students. Pulling a group of your solid stakeholder teachers and developing that plan for, what this year looked like, or what the next year is going to look like, or what are the areas that we need to focus on. And then obviously there was teacher unions, identifying strategies to improve achievement, offer induction and professional development to attract and retain qualified teachers, and keeping those teachers in your building. And there's obviously many, many more examples. On our next slide, educational support professionals, district and school leaders. Within each of these groups, you're going to have your stakeholder groups. And as I talked about before, sometimes you will have set groups as you go from group to group, but try not to overlap, so to speak, as keeping these groups separate. But again, you have, I just lost. Katie, I just lost the slides.
Yep. Can you see it in the screen? I'm sharing the screen as well.
Actually, I'm kind of blacked out here. You might have to take over for a second. Sorry about that.
No problem. So other stakeholders, education support professionals, those could be Aspire mentors, those could be volunteers that come in, those could be avid tutors. So keeping those support people in mind as well. District and school leaders, clearly you are working with colleagues there in the building and also at the district level, but maybe some of your colleagues at some neighboring schools can also provide some insight as well. And in the case of St. Helens and Scappoose and Clatskanie and Rainier, kind of that little Columbia County area where we are, a lot of us live within that area, but they're all their own districts. So one of my teachers at St. Helens High School, his wife is the principal at an elementary school in Scappoose. My children go to Scappoose School District. And so we have stakeholders in each other's work. And so it's important to keep that communication, that network open. Students are also very important stakeholders. Even at the elementary school level, the more you can engage students, you are going to engage their families as well. So that's a really good way to create that pipeline for engagement and engage them in school decision making and have them feel a sense of ownership and you get some pretty amazing results. At the high school level, a lot of schools have ASB or leadership, and again, that's another way for students to get involved in their school and make some incredible decisions. Our school district school board also has a student representative that is a member of leadership, so they can be influencing decisions at the board level. And then those students can bring that information back to your school as well and talk about what the overall system looks like so that our school is informed. I think especially at the high school level, we have students that have no idea that a school board even exists, let alone what the purpose of a school board is, or the idea that they can actually make change. So the more that there's that communication, I think there's more power in that. National, state, and local policymakers. Clearly, school board members are members of that. County commissioners could also fall under business and community leaders. I think one of the best things that I did was I immediately connected with our county commissioners. And it's a very small world. One of them, actually a city councilman, I taught skiing with at Timberline when I was in college. So Oregon is a very small community. And so the more that we can talk to each other on that personal level, the more connections we make. And we realize we're all pretty much interconnected. But also getting to know your district attorney in your county, or your assistant district attorney, or your police chief, or your fire marshal. So all of those people, we also have an emergency preparedness person. So connecting with them at the county so that there's a county response. All of them have stake in the success of your school. So the more connections you can make, you get a much more well-rounded view of how to move forward and what your needs of your school are.
All right, so in a nutshell, what does stakeholder engagement look like? It's obviously a process where meaningful connection and learning takes place through communicating with these individuals or groups of staff, students, parents, and community members. This can happen in a variety of places. It doesn't always have to happen here in your building. Again, traveling to people, taking part in meetings within the community, going to businesses, conversations at a ball game, conversations at a community event, a fair, whatever that looks like. Stakeholder engagement can happen in a variety of places. Make sure that you're out and about and making these connections. So some examples of engagement, and these are just a few that we had put down. We would actually, after we talk about these a little bit, we wouldn't mind opening the mic up a little bit to talk about some engagement again from you guys to see if there's something at the beginning of this year that you've already experienced in engaging your stakeholders. But developing family-friendly policies, provide professional development, we talked about that. Provide better information on school and school district policies and procedures. Parent groups, student groups, teacher groups. Collaborate with higher education institutions in your area for teacher administration preparation programs. These are just a few, like I said, but we wouldn't mind hearing from you guys a couple of maybe examples of engagement that maybe has already happened at the start of your year already.
Do we want to solicit those ideas now, or do you want to be thinking about those ideas and then we can share out as a whole group?
We could do that either way.
Well, I don't hear anybody jumping on really quick, like right now. So if you jot down some ideas, then we can do kind of a share out. And you might pick up some ideas along the way as well. So understanding the culture and history of your school community, first of all, it's so important to gain perspective, to really understand what it is that you're walking into. And the best way to do that is to ask. And the next slide shows leading with inquiry, right? Asking those who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, the could, the would questions. So really being inquisitive, being curious about your community. And one strategy is using some meet and greet sessions with each group. Again, when I walked into my position, they had a huge turnover in administrators. They had also had experienced a death of a staff member. They had also experienced 3 suicides in the past year. There was a lot of trauma that had happened in a very short period of time. And so I made it a point to sit down and have one-on-one meetings with every single employee at the school district before I even officially started. I just took 2 solid days out of my time and sat down and just asked them a couple of those inquiry questions and took copious notes and really understood what they brought to the table, what their passions were, what their interests were. And then I could start to understand how what had happened over the past had impacted them so that I could really approach their needs and show them that they could trust that when they talk to me, that I will listen, and that we could work together to work through these issues rather than any kind of an authoritarian or a top-down leadership style, but to really be collaborative. And that also helped identify what our needs were, and it identified what our values were. So it really helped in getting those conversations going to establish a mission and a vision as a whole group, because a lot of them just hadn't been talking to each other. So that didn't exist. So by doing this, it made it a safer place to start to gather that information and work together to move the whole school forward. What was really great is that I was able to take out different words or quotes or values that they had shared in those meetings. And then when pre-service started, I created these word clouds of the answers to these questions. And what was fascinating is that these word clouds, if you've used them before, which they're pretty common, the words that are bigger are the ones that come up more frequently in the word cloud. And in talking with a lot of the staff, they felt very lonely and they felt like nobody talked to them or no one listened to them and doors were all shut all the time or no one ever came into my room. And when I shared the word cloud, they again realized how much they actually had in common. So that also helped create that bond that we could work together in service of a single mission. And we all have very similar needs, and we need to bring that out into the forefront so that it's very clear what the next steps are going to be.
And kind of to piggyback along that, so in my first year here at Grant Union, besides getting out into the community, talking with community members, I actually set up specific times to do meet and greets. It was here at the school, with our parent group, with student groups, of course, starting in July 1st or what that looks like, a lot of teachers aren't in the building yet. And so instead of meeting them on the first day of school or first day of in-service or what it looks like, setting up times where you can do meet and greets and start getting a little bit of understanding of your building, a little bit of history, and then taking that information and working with it moving forward.
So I mentioned leading with inquiry is one strategy that you can use in asking those questions with those starters. Another really valuable strategy that I've learned, even just in this last year, is the idea of needs-based communication. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with this type of communication, but it's really valuable in your personal life, but also in your professional life in connecting with stakeholders. And the basic premise is that we all have 7 basic needs, and these are different than Maslow's hierarchy, so just putting that out there. But the idea is that we all need autonomy to a certain level. So we have to have the ability to make the decision to do something. So, you have the choice of whether or not you want to have a bagel or toast in the morning. That is autonomous. You have the option of, getting a down comforter or a cotton blanket. Those are autonomous decisions. Or it could be something where I have the autonomy to rewrite a board policy and present it to the board because I think that that's really in service to our school. And the board has, has a conversation with you about it, and you're able to make some of those decisions at that higher level. So that's also having that autonomy as well. The security is, do I feel secure enough in where I'm at? So do I have enough money in my bank account to pay my bills? Do I feel secure enough in my position that I can take some risks? So that's that sense that I have those boundaries out there and I can kind of play around in them enough. I have the resources available to me. Esteem is something that goes really deep, all the way down to your core. Do I have imposter syndrome? Do I really, am I really a principal? What does that mean? So that really gets into your psyche a little bit, but really feeling like, yes, I can do this job. And some days you may feel that way, and other days you may not feel that way, and that's okay. But you know, connecting down to that esteem and feeling like, yes, I'm really valuable and I have worth. Purpose, I think, drives a lot of us in why we entered into education. If it's a student-centered approach, we feel like we want to be in service to others, or we want to be advocates, but feeling that that higher sense of drive. Connection is also really important with stakeholders. Even just the opportunity to see someone's face or have a conversation with them, whether that's you know, talking about what we're going to do about the football season coming up in March, or that's just, hey, how was your weekend? Did you enjoy going out on your boat? Right? So it can be a variety of levels. Leisure, I think that's super important for us to remember, that we need to take it upon ourselves to carve out time to turn off technology, to read a book, to go for a run, to play with our kids, to have that leisure time, and recognize that our stakeholders need that as well. If you end up with a lot of staff, or a few staff that feel like they're doing everything, then that is one area that we really need to watch out for, because some of those staff members can start to feel like, why am I doing all this work? So if we keep that in mind, that our stakeholders need that as well, that also helps us come across as a little bit more humane. And then health as well, right? Especially with the pandemic, health is on the forefront of everybody's minds. How we're going to look out for each other, ensure safety and health. But even without COVID, the idea that, you know, we want to be in healthy environments, and we're going to take care of each other. So if we can recognize that every person has those 7 basic needs, when you start to have conversations with your stakeholders, you can start to tune in to what their core values are. Maybe this person is really concerned about the health of our community, and but also making sure that kids are able to connect with their teachers and get the access to resources and counselors and mental health. And they're really concerned about how that's going to happen in a distance model. And those are their 2 core values. So the way that you respond to that stakeholder, in order to honor those core values, you probably don't want to just start talking about, well, we need to make sure we have enough money to have enough staff in order for it to be healthy, or we have to make sure that, you know, or get defensive and say, well, I have to be making these decisions, or our team has to be making these decisions, and, you know, we have to take care of that first before we can even talk about connection or health. Because that immediately turns our stakeholders off, because they feel like they're not being heard. And the more that we can craft our response to honor that, then we understand where they're coming from, and we can talk about the other things, but also know that those conversations are going to be very different than someone who is really just more concerned, how much SIA money are we going to get? Is the high school success plan fully funded? What is our FTE for the year? How are we doing our master schedule, right? Those people are kind of living in that autonomous and security area. You're probably not going to be talking to them about, well, we really have to be looking at it from a mental health perspective and a holistic approach, right? They're not there. They're not at that point. So these can be really powerful tools to use. So if you think about having those conversations, the list on the right are just kind of some points that I like to keep in a notebook that are easy to remember, where when I'm having a conversation, I observe what is happening. So I observe that they are talking about the importance of athletics, which maybe their focus, their core value is on leisure and connection. I start thinking about what is driving those core values. And then I take a step to just kind of feel where I'm sitting in that moment. So then I know how I can engage to best respond. So if we can observe and think and then feel, then we're honoring that whole process of communication. It also helps us to not get defensive immediately, which can be really valuable if you get some, particularly parents, but also community members that, you know, they're also living through this experience of uncertainty, and they're not education professionals, and they don't know what the next school year is going to look like. All they know is the crisis teaching that happened in the spring. And so it's really easy to immediately go onto the defensive when you know that you've been doing all of this immense amount of work that just may not be visible to everyone. So if you take that time to just observe and think and feel, and remember that emotions are data, they're not directives. So you don't have to respond based on your own emotions. It's just information for you to process. Another important piece is to always validate first. So if you have someone coming to you or you're having a conversation with a stakeholder and they're bringing up a concern, if you validate that concern first and say, wow, that must be really frustrating for you to feel this certain way. And you can really get granular in that description. Immediately, their guard comes down, and then they're more willing to have more deeper conversations. And it doesn't have to be a complaint, but if they're bringing any kind of idea to you, if people feel validated first, they're willing to take that next step and get engaged. And then connecting to their core values, I talked a little bit about that. And that really will help you identify those aspects of the school and community culture as well. What do people really care about in this community? What are going to be our driving forces here? Maybe you come in and you have a really clear idea of what one need is that you know that you have to address, but that didn't come up as a core value with any stakeholder that you've talked about. Well, now I know I really have to be validating their core values and be working on that. And if I build enough trust, then I can get them to use that other, you know, kind of follow along with the other piece that we really need to be driving forward. But they feel like their voice is then heard.
Okay, so now that you've identified your stakeholders, how to involve them in the process. So whether it be laying out the plan for the new gym floor, adopting curriculum, looking at policy regarding student drug testing for extracurricular activities. When you have your stakeholders and you bring them in or you go to them, what that looks like, have a plan, be well organized. Ensure that your stakeholders know that you're going to start on time and you're going to end on time. Their time's valuable. You don't want to waste it with a meeting that doesn't have an agenda, is not planned out well. Make sure that they understand that you value their time, that you're going to start, you're going to end on time. Focus on the objective. A lot of times if you're not well planned out in a stakeholder meeting, things can kind of go to the left, go to the right, and you lose purpose of why you're there. Obviously, it's still a great time to build strong professional relationships with the people that are there. Obviously, you want to ensure all voices are heard. They're not there just to listen to you talk. You're bringing them in because you value their input. Be able to facilitate resolutions in difficult situations. Okay, they might not agree with what you're going to say. They might have a different idea. So be accepting of ideas. Be able to facilitate those, possible conflicts that happen when you bring a group in. And always be willing to meet outside the school. So obviously it can't always be at the school, so be willing to go to them if you're going to have a meeting that is related to involving the school within the community, whatever that looks like. So it doesn't just have to be meetings in the library every time we're willing to travel. But again, being organized, using their time effectively, continuing to build those strong relationships in this process now that you're involving your stakeholders in your decisions. Okay, so quiz time. We thought there was going to be a chat box. There's not. So maybe we can just turn A, B, C, D into 1, 2, 3, 4. So real quick, why are stakeholders in education important to the success of educational goals? Is it because each stakeholder can help decrease support for local educational goals? Is it because a team effort on the part of stakeholders is involved in achieving educational goals? Is it C, all stakeholders offer the same type of support for local educational goals, or is it D, all of the above? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Correct answer would be 2, B.
And you're welcome to just shout out the answer or throw up the number.
There you go.
There we go. I like it. All right, number 2, which of the following would be considered a stakeholder in education? Parents, local business leaders, teachers, or all of the above? I'm seeing some 4s. Awesome, all of the above.
All right, and 3, what do you call anyone who has interest in the success of an education system? And that's why we're here. Is it the school administrators, community members, stakeholders, or businessmen? All right, a lot of 3s up there, great.
So the benefits of getting to know your stakeholders, we've talked a lot about this, but this is kind of a 30,000-foot view, is that we get better insight into their views and opinions. We really get out there and take in information that can inform our strategic plans and how we communicate with different groups. Maybe it's expanding our network so that maybe the person that you're talking with isn't the right person for the plan that you want to go forward with, but maybe they know that person and you didn't before. So expanding that network there. It allows you to make bigger decisions more quickly and at a reduced cost. You get greater buy-in from the community. You get a lot more buy-in if people think they came up with the idea themselves. So if we can be leaders and facilitate and guide those conversations to get to a point, we'll definitely have a greater buy-in. Stronger likelihood of positive outcome, which I think we all are striving for all the time. And then you do develop greater trust, which is foundational to building relationships. And if we are trying to teach our students to build strong relationships and self-actualize, then we need to be doing that with our adults in our community as well.
All right, we talked a lot about this as well, but making connections with those stakeholders, reach out and make contact. You can't expect that they're going to come to you. Some of them will come to you, but you still need to make sure you're reaching out. So we talked about providing opportunities for meet and greet sessions, individual groups, individuals. Reach out to your community partners. By starting that process, it opens the doors to other community partners. Visit your local businesses and community leaders. Go to them. Be active on social media in a positive way. Weekly updates provided, so emails, letters, whatever that looks like, updating your webpage, calling parents, calling parent groups, inviting for those meet and greets. Be active in community events. There's a lot of things that obviously take part in your school, but also in your communities, whether that's I don't know, the Saturday market, the fair, whatever that may be. Be out and be visible. And obviously dedicate time for your student groups. You have a lot of different student groups within your building. Dedicate time to meet with all of them, listen to them, hear their voice, make those connections for your stakeholders.
So we're in a very unique situation now in that the majority of us are having to do all of this in a virtual or a distant setting. And I don't know if any of you are brand new to your community and you haven't met anyone in person yet. I know that I have a colleague who just moved over to a Washington school district, moving from the high school level to the elementary level, and she doesn't know anyone, and she's assigned to 2 separate buildings. So she's trying to think, how am I going to get to know people? I'm completely new environment. So these are just a couple of the tools that you can use in a virtual setting, and you can engage with them at different levels based on your comfort. But social media can be a really powerful tool for an administrator. myself, I have a Twitter account, a LinkedIn account, an Instagram account, a Facebook account. Our school has put things up on YouTube. Luckily, at the high school level, we do have a student leadership crew. And so they put together, you know, all of our graduation activities. We had full assemblies on YouTube that we posted online. So we were able to kind of start building that into the culture as we move forward into the fall. But, you know, some of these are really great for sharing information, first of all. If your school doesn't have a Facebook page that maybe is run by a staff member, like an activities director or a parent volunteer, so that that information is easily accessible. Our Facebook page, the actual leadership page is closed. So in order to be a member of that, you have to click on join and answer a couple questions, so that we are only limiting that to people who are either currently enrolled in school or are an alumni. So it's not just open to the general public. So we can filter that a little bit that way. But parent groups can have a social media account. I know our parent group, because they were in their infancy and getting started, they decided to create their own Facebook page and kind of run that. And then we had a couple of parents who were the liaisons with me through that group. So parents who may have been disenfranchised in the past could feel a little safer engaging in a parent group page that I wasn't part of. And then they could get their voice heard in that way. So you also want to think about how to differentiate people's level of comfort and of engagement with social media. Boosters usually have their own pages as well. But a lot of these programs have different ways that you can engage with people. You can have, you can do a Facebook Live and be answering questions, and people can be, you know, putting things in the chat, and you can be, you know, answering in a live session and hold a meeting that way. You can have Twitter, different hashtags, and you can kind of run it in different ways. So there's a lot of tools that are built into these that can be really useful, especially in this virtual and distance setting. Zoom is also a really powerful tool. My preference is Zoom over Google Meets, predominantly because of the breakout rooms. Being able to split people out is really valuable to do collaborative work. If you start holding a Zoom meeting and you have 300 people show up, it's really difficult to manage, especially if you're on your own. So Zoom can be really powerful for one-to-one meetings, which I highly encourage. If you set aside time in your schedule, even if you've got a list of all of your staff members, and you're pulling maybe a popsicle stick, right, to make sure you get everybody, or you have everybody's name on a ring and you're just flipping through them. But to schedule those into your day so that you can really check in with each of your staff members and make sure that they know that you are still there and you are still involved, and you're able to hear them, because their needs are going to be changing pretty rapidly throughout this whole time period. So if you can make that part of your culture, people will feel really heard and continue to build that trust. And that's not just with staff members, but other stakeholders as well. Parent information sessions have been really popular for me. Our community really appreciates getting timely information. And even if you think it's timely, it's probably not timely enough for them. So the more you can over communicate, it gets really appreciated. So you could just push something out on all your social media. We're going to have a parent information session. I'm just going to, you know, share all of this info with you, and you can type things in the chat. The great thing about Zoom too is you can record it, and then you have a transcript of all of those questions as well. So then you can take your time and bring those questions into maybe an FAQ that then you push out after the meeting. So again, people start to feel heard because they know their questions are being answered. That can be really helpful as well. And just having maybe open hours. So a principal chat, just say, hey, lunch with the principal at noon, come to this Zoom meeting. That, you know, you may get a low turnout, you may get one person who shows up every single time, and you take advantage of that opportunity to build a deeper relationship. But just letting people know that you're open and accessible and available is really powerful. Another important thing to remember too is that we also have our own lives, and we also have a whole new work environment that we are having to manage. So we have to really reflect on what our own expectations and boundaries are and communicate that out. So you may have been one of those people that are running around in a building and have your cell phone on you and you're responding to emails throughout the day as you're dropping into classrooms. But maybe now, if you're working from home, you have little kids that are pulling you in different directions, or you're having to, run a training and now you have to go take care of something else. Those expectations and boundaries may have changed. And so having a really clear email responder can be really handy. So you can just type something up that says, I make it my best effort to respond to you within 2 business days. If this is an emergency, this is who you can contact, or here's a number for you to call, or something like that. But think about what those boundaries are for yourself so that everybody's really clear on that. And that's also modeling for other people that you may not be available in the same way that you were before. And I mentioned before, relationships can be really challenging to build remotely. So you really need to be intentional and plan, and also think about it through that equity lens. Who is less likely to engage through remote or distance or virtual? And be creative in how you're going to engage those people.
Okay, so we're kind of wrapping things up here. So keeping those stakeholders involved for the duration, obviously maintaining contact with them, quick check-ins are a great thing. And as Katie had mentioned, social media is huge. If you're, just a Facebook user or just a Twitter user, you got to take a look at expanding your repertoire and including all those. And I know it can be overwhelming, but those, you have to be putting your information out there on what people are using. Provide updates along the way to your stakeholders. There's, some things just don't happen overnight. It's a process. Keep them informed of what's going on and where you're at. And continue to go to them. Again, you can't always expect everybody to come to you. Your quick check-in with them can be you going to them and having that conversation at their place or wherever that may be, their business. Be accessible. And as Katie mentioned, in the time that we're in, when social media and texting and all that stuff, there are limitations, but you do have to be accessible. And of course, always make it a two-way street. It's not always just about the interests of you and the school. You have to make it a two-way street and make this a joint effort. So.
And this slide will be available to, well, the whole presentation will be available to you in Canvas, so you can access these links through that interface. But some of the resources there, NEA is a good resource, EdTech Review. There's some information about strategic planning. The Healing Centered Environment link and also the ODE Equity Lens link is also here as well. And if you have any questions, Ryan and I are certainly welcome to answer those. I know we're cut out on time. I think we do have a 10-minute break until 9:25, but we can be available for questions, or you can send us an email. If you go to the if you go to the COSA website, I think you can find our contact information as well. So we are both available to support you, and I'm super excited for you for this year. And I hope you have a great start to your virtual school year.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. One thing I would just add on that would be, I did have a meeting with a president of a bank, and after our follow-up, I did send him a personal written note on letterhead from our school, and that was a decision of him writing me a $300,000 check. Was a personal note. So I remember some of this stuff from the VP, new VP stuff about 8-9 years ago of stakeholders, and a person did that, and so I did it, and makes a difference of personal notes sometimes too.
Great point. That's awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Katie, again for your presentation this morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and present this business. Appreciate the intro, Chris. One one little correction, nobody's an expert at distance learning. It's all brand new. So hopefully we can work through some of the finer details more about vision. I've been privileged to work with Heidi over the last couple weeks, and that's been really fun. So COSA is a great organization, brings good people together, and we steal ideas and get better together. So I think we already did our introductions pretty well. Thank you, Chris. So today's purpose, we're going to basically, we like sharing stories. And so today I want you to sit back and listen to the soothing sounds of some fellow administrators share our experiences, because we all have different stories, but I think we all start out the same way, is what I'm finding. Today we're going to identify our purpose and mission, hopefully a little bit. And then be ready to answer these kinds of questions. You know, why did you choose to leave the classroom, if that was even a choice that you made? What are the top priorities for your school? And what is it like to work in your building? The previous presenters did a great job of kind of outlining how do you go out and seek that kind of information. So we're going to take it one step further. And we have a limited amount of time. And so we're just going to get going. So I'm going to turn it over to our Heidi.
Thanks, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. I admire your perseverance to be here on the 4th day of conferences during a week where, at least in our district, blueprints are becoming due, going before the school board. And we haven't even officially started our contract yet, probably like many of you, and feel like we're already working pretty hard. There's a crazy amount also of professional development planning to do for our staff as they return. So I just want to thank you for taking time to invest in a network of administrators. And like Chris mentioned, and Colin, as you grow as an administrator, your colleagues who you work with will go in other places, and hopefully you stay in touch and lean on them. Those phone calls are just lifelines sometimes to, like, am I seeing this right? Am I experiencing this correctly? What's your thought on that? Our colleagues are so valuable in our work, and the network can be really tight if you lean on people. So all we really have to share is our experience. At least that's true for me. So I want to take some time to just share kind of my journey, where I'm at, what I'm doing, and reflect on some things that I did my first year as principal that I've learned from. And I want to try to give just a little bit of advice or some ideas about how to be brave and vulnerable when sharing your why, so that you can fast forward your connections and collaboration with your team. So I came to this principal position at Harrison Elementary after working a couple years as an assistant principal in our district. The district had just passed a bond to build a new building, and it was a really exciting time. We were going to build a $23 million new elementary school. And I think the superintendent saw in me some skills around executing projects. I'm an organized person. I kind of do well in scheduling and handbooks and organization things. I like to have communication systems and have really transparent, clear plans that I share with people. And those skills are good in building a building, and they're good in leadership. But my first year as a principal, so I moved from Cottage Grove High School to Harrison Elementary School, and shift from a high school world to an elementary world. And I had not been an elementary teacher. I had been a preschool teacher, but that was about 15 years before. And I came in really wanting to show my competence to the team. So I did things like I created a 4-year vision plan, and I did not at that time have an assistant principal. So I wanted to really show myself as a competent leader. And so I came out really strong. I came out really strong as organized and clear with my direction and my vision. And it was good to have that vision as we looked to change buildings and to build a building. There's so many details in that. But what happened that first year is that I did not carve time or prioritize the opportunity for just human connection to start with. And that really stopped the progress that I could have made that first year. And that's what I want to kind of talk with all of you about. So here's just a little slide of my kind of like my resume, which is how I came out to my team. Like, here's my resume. 2 years as a assistant principal, 5 years as an athletic director, 12 years as a teacher, owned a preschool. I'm ready, I'm organized, I'm professional. I am competent to lead this building. So then can you go to the next slide, Jamie? I'll just say slide. Does that work? Slide. So I learned quickly and very much in my face, school climate is not built through better policies. It's built through better relationships. Slide. So what I decided to do after 2 years of struggling in our building, and by that time we had moved into our new school building, so we were really at a place where we were ready to reinvent ourselves. Kind of by default, we had to reinvent ourselves. We were moving on to a new campus. And I decided after some work with, you know, reading some Brene Brown work and really doing some soul searching, I decided to have a staff meeting where I really just became vulnerable with my team. I opened up and shared like this whole question of why are you doing what you're doing and where do you come from? And it actually started with a pretty candid conversation with some union leaders at a bar. We were hanging out after hours and talking about just some struggles we were having with staff. And this union rep just said, why did you become an administrator? Like, it's so weird. And I got to share my story, and she looked at me and said, have you told your staff that? Have you told them why you became a teacher and an administrator? And I was like, no, I haven't. She's like, you need to. So I encourage you, and I'm going to model this for you. You know, it's hard to be vulnerable. And when we share our own experience, it's really normal to have emotion. And emotion isn't bad, but sometimes people see emotion as a weakness. But I would challenge each of you as new leaders to share from a place of vulnerability, because that vulnerability is going to be that connection and the relationship that you'll build on in all of your leadership. So I got to share my story. I am a small town farm girl, grew up in Triangle Lake, which is a small town west of Eugene. Some people from the U of O know the rock slide. That is just sorry. That's just the rock slides were just about a mile from my house. And my father is deaf, and my mother moved straight from her childhood home into our family home on the farm, and came from a family culture where going to college was not encouraged for women. She was encouraged to be a homemaker, and she was great at it. I'm the youngest of 4 children. We have a lot of teachers in our family. So education was around in my sphere of conversation a lot growing up. When I was 13 years old, my father, who was deaf, was going through some other things, and he actually became physically abusive with my mom. And it was a hard time, and he moved out, which was good, but it left us very vulnerable as a family financially. We didn't have a lot of money to start with. My mom was just a classified employee. I remember her, this is why I have such a heart for classified people. I remember her working, and at the end of working a whole month and getting what you would think would be your paycheck, she actually paid the difference for her insurance premium. So instead of bringing home pay, she worked and then paid a little bit more for insurance. But when I was 13, our family really, dynamics changed a lot. And we were at a point where we almost lost our home. We couldn't pay the taxes. It was a hard time for us. And I remember clearly seeing and thinking that, man, my mom is stuck. She's stuck. She doesn't have any choices. And the reason she's stuck is because she, not by fault of her own, but just it has not been empowered through education. She doesn't have choices in job opportunities. She doesn't have the ability to navigate a lot of systems because she hasn't been in that world. And at that moment, I really clarified my purpose or vision as a professional person. I had tossed around journalism or pre-law or other things, but I decided it was going to be my mission to empower young people through education. And I fell into being a middle school, high school English language arts teacher. And I really clearly communicated with my students that what you have to say, the way you see the world matters, and the world is better for it. And I want to partner with you to build your voice so that people can really hear you and understand you, and that you can really hear and understand other people. So I loved that classroom world, and we had so much like wonderful time together with students where I got to see students really grow to find their voice, to be able to speak their truths, to share their perceptions of the world around them, tell their story of kind of how they got to where they were. And I loved that classroom teaching world and did that for quite a while. And then I was teaching senior creative writing, and I had a student who did an incredible job. She actually shared her own pretty traumatic experience with the class in this setting where we were sharing kind of our own stories. And I was so excited for the growth that I had witnessed in her. And then I was talking to her after class for a while and just talking about, because she was struggling in other classes. And she started to explain to me how hard it was in other classes. And in that moment, I realized that for students to be successful, especially students that are typically marginalized, students need not just one classroom that's safe and predictable and rigorous, but they need whole school systems that are safe, that feel, that are predictable for them, that they know how to navigate, and that both believe in them and support them to reach really high levels. And that is the work of administration. We create systems. We create school systems that are safe and predictable and rigorous for students. And so that was kind of the move for me, the shift from the classroom to administration. And then the shift to elementary was pretty natural, because if you've worked with high schoolers, you know that there can be a little callousness, and maybe the sooner the better we get to them. So it became pretty natural for me to shift to elementary from high school under that same purpose. So Jamie, what's the next slide? So that moment where I shared that story with staff really was a pivotal moment for us. And I've held true to this idea that every day focus on your purpose. Remember why you do what we do. We're all facing getting burned out right now, and we don't get burned out because of what we do, but we get burned out because we forget why we are doing what we're doing. So next slide. So I really want to encourage new leaders to focus on your why, really clarify your why. You will have some pushback, and if you're implementing change and being rigorous, it's not gonna be smooth sailing the whole time. But as you're building a school culture, if you can start from your why and really articulate your why and build your culture around that, you can create a climate as a team of coworkers that is really honest, and the connections will be much, much deeper. Beyond, I think I'm going to skip, I had that Michael Scott Office video clip, but I think I'm going to skip that. But don't you love The Office? Beyond sharing our why, we as a team were able to move in just to some normalizing behaviors. So building a school culture, I think, has to start with your why and some honest vulnerability. And then culture is built by behaviors and expectations and behavioral norms. So we started to really talk about things over and over again that were expected behaviors. Things like, boy, we really, here at Harrison, we love to praise in public, and then we offer critical feedback in private. We do that with kids. We do that with adults. We do that with district office. We praise in public, and we kind of correct in private. And that became a behavioral norm that turned into a culture. We also started behavioral norms like, greeting everybody at the door with a smile. And that starts with you as a leader. You're greeting everybody at the door with a smile. Teachers are doing that, greeting everybody at the door with a smile. And all of a sudden, those behavioral norms become a culture where people feel it in the air. So we were able to move as a team from a place where there was kind of some tension and some difficulty in really collaborating into a very collaborative team where we understand where people are coming from. And we also have a culture that we've built around behavioral norms. So I think I have, just next slide, Jamie. I don't want to take too much of your time too. So here was one little saying, even if we disagree about everything, we can still be kind to each other. Next slide. And then we're not a team because we work together. We're a team because we respect, trust, and care for each other. Next slide. So my story that I shared with staff comes from a place of honesty and truth, and that needs to be true for you as a leader too. People are going to see through something if it's not genuine, right? So we must come from a place of honesty. Vulnerability creates those honest connections. Don't feel like you have to overshare. I know a lot of us have been through really traumatic things that have changed our lives, and you don't have to share everything. You can have some private life as private life, but you do need to frame your own story of how you've gotten to where you are. What led you into administration? How did you get here? Why are you here? What's your goal for being here? Those are questions that leaders need to be ready to answer in a moment, and they need to be a response that comes from a place of honesty and probably vulnerability. So oh, next slide. Sorry, Jamie. So my leadership challenge to myself is to be strong but not rude, to be kind but not weak, to be bold but not a bully, to be thoughtful but not lazy, to be humble but not timid, to be proud but not arrogant, and to have humor without folly. Next slide. I want to make sure Jamie has enough time to kind of share his why too. But as you're planning, and we'll come back to this too, it's really important to not just create, but to actually carve out and hold sacred space for time and connection. It's through those vulnerable connections that we really become a team, and the work becomes so much easier when we come from that place of vulnerability and honesty. So next slide. Oh, and then I just love this little girl. And also it's really easy to look past any critical feedback when you are just really focused on that love and connection with your team and your place of truth. So I'm gonna leave some time for Jamie. Thank you guys for just allowing me to share my personal story, and we'll get into helping you build your why soon, but I wanna hear from Jamie too.
All right. Yeah, great story, Heidi. There's a lot that I can share about myself, but here are the logistics of where I am and where I've been. Currently, I'm the proud principal of Lock Brown Middle School, home to Wildcats here in Dallas, Oregon. We have served 6th through 8th graders, about 700 kids, rolling about 75 staff. Chris mentioned in 2017, I was honored with the National Digital Principal of the Year. I was one of 7 in the country. And I really can't equate that to the work that I personally did, but as a team, we did a lot of work. And so I honored our staff with bringing this big old crystal thing home from Philadelphia. And so celebrated with our staff, but it was really, a lot of work getting from that first day to, 7 or 8 years later from when we actually were recognized in a positive way. But I really attribute it to the work and the attitudes of the staff. So my background comes from a lot of different things. I was a alternative ed teacher, which I loved. And we have a little program here in Dallas called Morrison Campus. And I got to teach there for 6 years. Just before then, I was a special ed teacher in Salem Kaiser. And so I love the program so much that they let me be the principal of the program for about 3 years. And then budget cuts hit. And then I was, what I thought at the time was a demotion. It was one of those, I love my job, and why would you put me as an assistant principal at the middle school? Why would you do that to me? But I think things happen for a reason. And truly it was as I look back, it was probably what was best for me. When you get too comfortable in something, you start to think you know it all, and you start just going about your business as you did the day before. So I think shaking it up is really, really important. And for that to happen to me early in my career was a good wake-up call, because if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't really necessarily be the person I am today, the leader I am today. And that stems from being a family man, a dad, So those were all kind of great things. But a little bit about my background might help explain how I got to my vision. I worked with kids who were kind of cast out of the normal system, didn't fit into your rigorous standard traditional school setting. And I felt like I connected to those kids quite a bit, and knowing that they needed something more because whatever we were doing was not working for them. And Heidi, kind of talked about building relationships with your staff. I mean, the kids need that every day too. So it's a testament to your school culture, how well you're able to work with your students, but also your staff. So my first year as principal, man, I was awesome. Here at Lock Rail Middle School, I dressed the part, I talked the part. You should have saw my first staff meeting. Man, I had the staff handbook out. We went through it page by page, section by section. And man, I was doing a bang up job because that's what my job was, right? And I attributed that to kind of being, just keeping the boat afloat. But so many times as leaders, we emulate, and as teachers as well, we emulate what we know, and so what I was seeing, before me, I thought that's what I had to be. And it didn't take too long before I realized that was really, really uncomfortable for me to be a part of. And it was, I think, everyone's story. We get into, we want to do a good job. Heidi was in that same boat. We thought we knew what we had to do in order to be this leader, this building principal. So despite my wearing a tie and a jacket, in the 80-degree library that first day when we did all our staff meetings all together, and making sure we had the guidelines and all the policies and procedures in place. I've learned a lot since then. So hopefully I can kind of share why. But really, things didn't start kicking for me until my own child entered my school in the middle school as a 6th grader. And we went through all kinds of woes, as all the state has done with budget cuts. And so when I took over the middle school, I was assistant principal here before, so I knew what was going on. But we had just lost all electives. We still had a standard day, and we still had the same number of kids. At that time, we were about 750 kids, and it felt like the building was just bursting. So we got as creative as we could, but basically I was coming to school every day, a school that I didn't really feel very much pride in sending my own child. And so as some of us do, we go home and we lament to our spouses, and we always talk about why it's somebody else's fault, and how they're the bad person. And it's a great blame game that we sometimes do. And it's unfortunate, but So one night we were just talking about, you know, what we wanted for our kiddo. His name's Cole. He just graduated. He's off on his way to Western Oregon next fall in some format. So we did it, and I think he turned out pretty good. But I think we were about 5 or 6 years too late for making some changes for him. Very bright kid, but also you have to keep him engaged, or he'll do the bare minimum and just stop there. So but that night I'm just like complaining, and you know, whose fault is it that our kids don't have electives, and the teachers don't do a great job because the kids are just sitting in rows and they're bored to tears and they're just cranking out worksheets, and that's not an education I want for my kid. So as Heidi talked about, making it personal, why she chose administration, why she chooses to be a leader, I think we have to make it personal. And when we can look at it through the eyes of a dad, in my case, or as a mom or a parent, or even an aunt or uncle, and that's what I put to my staff is, you know, some kid, and you have to ask yourself, what is it that you want for your own child? What do you want for your niece? And I have a whole bunch of these little kiddos coming up. So I keep working, even though my son's graduated, I keep working for the sake of my nieces, my nephews, and that's personal. It's selfish. I get it. I'm a selfish person, but I think in our work that we do, I think it really benefits the whole lot of the system. So really, at that point, my wife pointed out to me that I was the leader of the building, that probably no one else could do the work except for me, because I was the leader. And attitude reflects leadership, of course, and we were in the dumps at an attitude right then. And so I had to make some changes, but it was hard because I had to get away from, I was wearing that tie, I looked sharp. I mean, man, my shirts were ironed, and I was being really efficient in my staff meetings. So I had to get away from that standard, which I think some of those things are really, really important still, but it had to be more about my why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Okay. So that, making it personal, I think was really, really important for me. So I could go all day, we don't have all day, about my story, why I'm passionate about things that I do. But what we have to ask ourselves, what inspires us? What are we about? And, you know, I think we have to start there. When it could be all over the map. And if it is, we're going to have the highest standardized test scores in the state, go with it. If it's going to be, we're going to have the critical thinkers and the doers of the world, go with it. But you have to start somewhere, you know, and I think along the way, you put things in place that help all kids and get things. Now, I'm not a big believer in standardized testing, so I choose to go a different route, but I know that some of us value different things, and much respect to the work that you all do. But I just know that had I known what I know now when I started out, I would have probably started a lot earlier. So hopefully you'll gather some things today that you might put in the back of your brain and say, well, I hadn't really thought about that, because in this day and age, as you're coming in as a new principal, there is so much that is going to be thrown at you. So we have to be patient, and it's going to be one of those things that it might take a few years, and be patient with that. But if you can start developing your why sooner rather than later, and thinking outside the box about what you want for your school, and make it personal. If you have a kid there, if you have a niece or nephew there, make it personal. But you're going to come into, you know, your masks. You're going to come into your hand sanitizers. You're going to come into hybrid and distance learning. And so this year is going to be a little bit crazy for us all. And, you know, I think just taking time and be patient about your vision, getting with your stakeholders, your staff especially, what is it that they want, you know? And so I'm going to share my story about how I got there. Maybe you'll pick up some ideas. Maybe you have some questions about how did you do that? How did it go? But we're just going to kind of keep rolling, okay? So this is one of my mottos. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Now, it's the small game. It's, you know, you can't do the long game in this. You have to take little wins, because if you try to change the world in one fell swoop, it's going to be really, really discouraging, because it's too big of a system. So one of the things that we try to do is just take baby steps, and you start somewhere. I mean, today we're going to get better than we were yesterday, and tomorrow will be even better. So we try to frame our growth as a building, and what are we doing today to make ourselves better for tomorrow, knowing that we're going down the road. Okay, so starting with our why, Chris and Heidi both alluded to the Simon Sinek, and he is probably the guru of this. He kind of coined the phrase, and I loved it. So we started with some of Simon's work. You know, we looked at the books and the TED Talks. One of my favorite books was Leaders Eat Last, I believe and we have that on our resource page. But it really talks about starting with your why. But that's hard when you look at school and all the things you think you're supposed to be doing and the things that have come before you. So that's just the graphic that I thought we would share. Okay. So our story at Loch Riel really started with my want for my son. I saw that he was bored in school. I knew that his potential was great. I knew what he was doing at home. When I came home one day, he and his buddy were laying on the patio in the backyard, and Cole was laying down on the ground on a big slab of cardboard. His buddy was tracing out these things that looked like wings, and they had some, you know, little sticks hooked to them. They were creating wings because they thought they were going to jump off the pergola and see if they, you know, I mean, those are the kinds of kids that we have nowadays. Hopefully they're wanting to create and experience life. And so I knew that he was really interested, and he was more hands-on, and I just knew every day he was coming to school, it was really killing him. But also too is knowing what the changes in our world are happening at such a rapid pace. I went to one of our COSA conferences, and no offense, but there was some time in our sessions that it didn't really speak to me. So we were in Bend down at the convention center there. And so I went downtown to my favorite place, Starbucks. And my kids tease me all the time because I constantly have a Starbucks in my hand. They just don't know I just refill it with another brand. But I was doing some of my own professional development at that time. I was down at Starbucks, you know, using the Wi-Fi, and I came upon this deeper learning because I want to know about deeper learning. What is it? What does it mean? And I came upon this Most Likely to Succeed video, and I watched the trailer, and you know, there was a cost involved, and I was just really, really interested in what that all meant. And it highlighted, you know, some of the work that this charter school in San Diego is doing, High Tech High, and all the work that they've done in deeper learning. But it was more about something that I love to call punching you in the nose. When someone gives you so much truth that you can't avoid it, it just makes your eyes water, because it just makes a lot of sense. So what I did is I went back to my superintendent and said, you know, there's a purchase thing, I'd like to show it to my staff. So we did, and we purchased it, and it's like a rental. So you had to, like, $300, you can show it once or twice to a group of folks. So it was a weird format, but so I watched it, and then I showed it to our staff. And the thing that it really talks about is, you know, the world is changing. Why are we continually teaching the kids in the way that we were taught, despite the changes? Our kids are going to need and deserve a different kind of preparation for their futures, but we are still preparing them for something that really doesn't exist anymore. We can probably all be at least admit some of that. So the film kind of just pinpointed some of those things that are no longer the same, and things that need to be changing in our world. And we really boiled it down to what our why was, and it centered around that deeper learning, but the 4 C's, you know, and the 4 C's for us are, we want our kids to critically think. We want our kids to be able to collaborate and communicate their ideas, but also we need creative kids. And so that was really easy to frame to my staff. What is it that we want for kids? Well, we want those things. We want deeper learning. We want our kids to be engaged learners. No longer can we accept that we're going to do worksheets all day, or, you know, fill in the blanks, or, you know, all those things that we traditionally do. we had to make some changes. And so we talked about deeper learning, and I soon found out that deeper learning meant a lot of things to different people, and we really didn't understand it. I mean, we saw the video, we were inspired. And what I found from the video and our reflection afterwards was, you know, our teachers want more. Hey, buddy, someone's on there. Our teachers want more for our kids, and they were like, thank you for bringing this, because I felt so imprisoned by this system. You know, we've gone through some changes in education. I mean, we've been, you know, hey, we're all project-based, you know, back then, and then we're going to tighten it up, and now it's about the test, and now it's no child left behind, and now, so, I mean, teachers are no doubt, they've been through some different rules, different guidelines, expectations, and so a lot of our teachers said, thank you, and I had to tell them, you have permission to do these things. But what about the standards? What about our evaluations? Those are all legitimate worries of a teacher, you know? So I think we had to break that culture of what was going through the minds of our teachers, and we've all been there, and I have to relate to them. So it's a continuum, and it's a long game. It's not, you're not going to change a culture overnight. But one of the things that I keep doing in our Wildcat Weekly there is one of my teachers says, you know, I look forward to every Sunday night, and we call it a different thing, but it's the Wildcat Weekly. But it's, he says, I said, why? I mean, it just inundates your email, and they're like, do you really read it? He says, yes, I look forward to it. And he says, it's like brainwashing, but good brainwashing. So communicating your why to staff is really important, but it's just not a one-time shot. And you can't expect that you say a word like deeper learning that they're going to get it. So what I've learned over the course of time is you have to keep it out in front of their noses. You have to keep it, you know, at the forefront of all your professional development. You have to keep it at, you know, during your PLCs, you have to preach and get back to your vision and your mission and your why. So some of the things that I've done is I've showed the documentary Most Likely to Succeed. I will do it again. It is still good stuff. And we just have to remind ourselves of our why consistently. But I try to do the very best of just, I guess, brainwashing our staff into knowing that it's still okay. I want you to keep doing these kinds of things. Here are some resources. So as a leader, those are the type of things that I can do for our staff, okay? All right, so communicating with our staff here, and I'm gonna blow your minds with all kinds of pictures, but I talk a lot, so you have time to really focus in on those pictures. Okay, so what I learned quickly was when I said deeper learning, and when I said the 4 C's, it sounds great, but no one really knew exactly what I was talking about or what it looked like, because we didn't learn that way, you know, and education doesn't look that way. What do you mean? What do you mean it's going to get noisy and loud, and that doesn't feel comfortable for anybody? So I had to change the way I communicated with staff, but I had to show them. They had to live it, they had to breathe it, they had to experience it from the lens of a student. So professional development in my building has evolved into experiential. It's no longer sitting and going over the staff handbook. It's no longer talking about policies, although those are important, but it's about doing and putting teachers in situations so that they can understand the things that we want to. So some of the things that I've done at our building is, you know, gamified our PD. You'll see pictures here of staff collaborating. You see the Tinker Camp there. We want thinkers and doers, hands-on learning, but we have to show them what it means. So our Tinker Camps are things that we do for our staff that put them in with kids. So they have to team up with kids. They hit all our 4 C's and they define it really well, but it gives them the experience and the background knowledge about what it is we want to, what we were looking for in the classrooms. So some examples, you know, we did the game of Clue, and the game of Clue is basically teaming up different content areas, and we integrated things, but we put them in really difficult situations. At the time we were talking about how do we weave in technology, and it was fairly new to everybody. You know, we were just coming on to Chromebooks, but we were just using them for worksheets, you know, and so we needed to get away from using it for, you know, our traditional ways, but also get into a spot where they knew if there were their tools, and how do we get to those 4 C's using technology. And it can come in all kinds of different formats, from using cardboard to little gadgets. Here we're building this center one with the bicycle. We were doing some STEM activities, and we were doing math, and we were doing braking and distance, and we were, you know, measuring with the wheels of the bicycle. So we had math and language arts people working together, but they're also being really creative, and they're having fun. And to walk around that kind of experience was enlightening, because they had smiles on their faces, and we had to keep reflecting on that. What were you experiencing? How did you feel? Where were the challenges? And so we have to kind of show them and put them in situations so it's no longer a mystery to them. They have something that they can glom onto that will take them to that next level, so they can start developing these kinds of experiences. And you have to support your staff in their endeavors. We not only talked about it, we throw it in their faces all the time. We don't always, you know, only do our PD that way, but we have to embrace, you know, what are those things that other people are doing out there. And part of social media is great. Twitter is probably your best PD that you ever find in your life, but people are scared of it because they think it's about what your niece is eating for lunch, which my niece does use it for. And I guess she likes peanut butter and jelly all the time, but but it has a lot of value in your PD, connecting with people across the world, you know, and the things that they're doing, and the thoughts and ideas. So, but you have to support their wants. And so I didn't only have to talk about it, I had to support it. So we found a way to get down to the Deeper Learning Conference in San Diego, and it's actually held at the place that Most Likely to Succeed was held. So it was really exciting for us. We felt we were like movie stars, and we ran into the teachers that were in the film, and we got to pick each other's brains, and it was awesome. But we have to support those kinds of things, and it was really expensive, and it felt like a vacation, but it was over spring break. And so our teachers went down there, but that made us a better school. I was developing teacher leaders along the way, and they were coming back and they were being experts for our other teachers. The next year we were able to take more, you know, and finally the district got a little bit more supportive on that. And the next year we took even more, and they weren't just from our building. So the things that your vision can get out there can impact a lot of different folks, but also your whole district. Okay. So that's how we communicate with staff. I only show this because it's rewarding when there's evidence that they get it. This is from our digital arts class. And I say we have to communicate with our students, but they get it through our actions. If we aren't showing them through our actions, we're not really communicating our vision to our kids. But so they're going to get it, hopefully. But this is one of our teachers, and I said, we need a new t-shirt design. And so he created this. He says, I think this represents us, you know? And I was so proud of this. And we couldn't make it into a t-shirt because it's got about 75 different colors, and we're limited by colors and cost. But we said, man, that is a great depiction. But when it starts to come alive and the teachers start living it, you know that you're making a difference as a leader, communicating that vision. Next is communicating with our community. And I got to tell you, I'm a big scaredy cat, and when I don't like confrontation at all if I can avoid it. But one of the things that we try to be cautious. I mean, you start throwing out words like, we're going project-based learning, or we're going to go deeper learning. Parents start to look at you weird, and they start to question about, what are you doing with my kid? You know? And so we had to kind of take a different route in Dallas, and it's probably no different. Especially if you don't really understand it completely yourself, and you can't guarantee every kid and every system in your school is doing it. So we had to start slowly. And so we use social media a lot, and I'm kind of the chief stakeholder in that. And Eric Schenniger is a great resource for me, and he talks about, if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. And so you want to take control of that story. So our project-based world, really, it started out, we had to show them, oh, I'm sorry. Someone wants a job or something, sorry. We're back, everybody back? Heidi, we good? Okay. All right. So we had to kind of take a different route. And one of the things I know as a parent is you can't avoid smiling faces. You can't avoid kids looking like they're engaged and having fun. So everything that we tell about our story, I want to include those things, but I also want to include a visual about what it looks like, what it means. You know, when we talk about deeper learning, I want to show them kids are working creatively. I want to show them that kids are working collaboratively. I want to show them, you know, that they're hands-on, that they're doing this new kind of learning. I want to show those things so it's easier to communicate and you don't have to get over that hurdle about what is this newfangled thing that you're doing to my kid. But if we show them and they see their smiling faces, that is an easier conversation to have, because now you can start with the 4 C's and you talk about, you know, here's what we're really about. So it's a tactical thing, but I think knowing your stakeholders and your community, some communities would take to it a little bit easier. I had to be a little bit more cautious in our community. So, but communicating with your community, you have to outreach, and social media is one of those best ways. It's like taking everything to the city center, you know, and because everyone's, you know, looking at it and sharing things. And so you want to put your best foot forward out there and communicate your why. But also too, in garnering community support, it's one of those things you have to invite them in. And so when we talk about our open houses and exhibition nights, we want our community to come in. So we send it to businesses and to our city council and to our city managers. And so we try to get our folks in and experiencing those things that we're most proud about. Because again, if you see it firsthand, it communicates so much. I mean, you don't have to explain it. I mean, you see a kid who's really talking about their project and where there were struggles, where there were successes, how they got through it. That's what our community wants to know, because that's our future. So we've done a lot of things like our open house and exhibition nights, which we kind of pair with our projects. You know, we do it 9 weeks. We've done it semester. We also have special things like STEAM nights, where they're STEAM specific. They're activities and people come and participate in real things. We also want to show off our kids, and that we have a hidden talent show is what we call it. And that's really cool because it's at the heart of a project that a group of kids have done. They said, Mr. Richardson, we want to have a talent show. And this cute little group of 6th grade girls. I said, I don't care. And they're like, what? You're supposed to care. I'm like, well, I'm not doing it. And they said, what if we did? I said, that's perfect. You go do it. So over the course of their 3 years, they developed this hidden talent show. And it was them, and they set it up, and they did, you know, rehearsals, and it was perfect. It was the best example of kids working in a project-based world. And so it was really amazing. And so it's something that's continued. We also want to show off projects that we're doing, you know, that show engagement and technical skills, like our stop motion film festivals. But we also go out to our community and do like maker socials and maker fairs. We go to the retirement village. This was at the Tap House, and it was a grown-up maker social. We had parents coming in and we were having them work on 3D printers. We were having them drive robots, and it's just communicating in a great outreach to help develop that vision of what Lockreal Middle School is about. You know, so it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and so you have to really have a great passion and a great team around you. This was the highlight of this, and I'll kind of work through it quickly, but we wanted to tell more of our story about innovation in our community. So we developed a Sparks night. So it was a night of speakers, and I had about 8 speakers that I've invited, you know, from community to a kid, to a teacher, business owner, from an administrator standpoint. And it was just a night where we took over the coffee bar downtown, and we shut down the streets, and we highlighted our steam machine that we have been developing that's kind of built for drive-in field trips. Instead of having kids go to OMSI, we bring the OMSI to them. But we needed to garner support, but that is like a beacon. So we wanted to highlight the steam machine, but the Sparks event, we invited parents and everybody, and it was a great night in helping communicate our vision and our why. And people walked away from that event thinking and knowing more about what we do, what we can do, and not only just that place we send our kids to school, but man, this place is a great resource. I bet you we have about 700 thinkers and doers at Lockreal Middle School that might help us with a community problem. And that garners support from your community, but also gets you in a spot that you can start developing real life projects and things that you want to see. So it's important that we communicate with our kids through our staff. Staff have to get it. They have to have hands-on experiential things so they get it. And we have to be really, really cognizant and really aggressive in getting it out to our community and what we're about. So those are the things that we've done at Lockreal. And it's exhausting, but I think it's been really rewarding because I've been able to get our staff in a place that they no longer ask for permission to take risks. And we now have a community that looks at us like, I'm proud to send my kid to Lockreal Middle School. So. Heidi.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm so curious now. I want to know all the details of all that work you've done. So cool. We are going to be a little pressed for time, but I'd really like to offer some support in each one of you as leaders, developing your why, coming from that place of personal passion and being ready to share that with kind of what I would call like an elevator pitch. So you're riding an elevator for a few minutes and you get to tell people where you're coming from, answer those questions of why did you choose to leave the classroom and go into administration? What are the top priorities of your school? What's it like to work in your building? And those are typically shaped by moments that you have personally had. An experience like Jamie mentioned about realizing his son's experience in school was very different than the person he saw at home, or experiences from a mentor or a person who has influenced you. That's where you get to tap into and draw from writing your own narrative of how you got to where you are and why is that pushing you forward. So we were hopeful to have a lot of time to do this, but now I would like to just keep opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. I know people are so gracious in their comments. I know there was one question about what are some ideas about adjusting, Jamie, your events, like your really cool hands-on events. Do you have a vision for how to do those with physical distancing in our new normal?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, it's kind of shut down a lot of our programming for fear, but I've been working with some folks who have the same. I mean, when you talk to your tech companies, like for instance, we're working with Sam Labs, who's a sponsor of our STEAM machine. They've had to pivot because all of their equipment, all of their activities are hands-on with these devices and things that our kids don't normally have at home. So they've had to kind of create new ways of doing things. So even on our engineering and our design thinking exercises, we've started to think about, okay, how can we package just basic materials to get kids creating and critically thinking. And so it could look like a Ziploc bag with cardboard and felt and a pair of scissors and some glue, you know? So how do we package that so we can be safe but still get the kids the materials, because not all kids have those kinds of things just sitting around their house. So yeah, it's been a challenge. It will be a challenge because we still want those things for our kids.
Yeah, we're all shifting. So I don't want to keep you too late. I just want to emphasize that if our interactions with our staff, especially if it's your first time meeting your team of people, involve, you know, the screen glasses and the mask and the shield to keep your eyes safe and the screen that you're in front of, this is the time where you really need to show people your heart and where you're coming from, because there's so many barriers between us being connected as human beings right now that we got to focus on that, because it's going to take you a lot further faster. I'm honored. I feel privileged that you spent some time listening to us. Please feel free to reach out. Our contact information is right there on that slide. I love to talk to people. There are things that we can learn from you, so I want to hear your perspectives and where you're coming from, and we are better together. So thank you for being part of the network of COSA.
I agree. And I hate doing PD this way. I mean, we're probably just, That's what I'm talking about. Someone's already got the book. Great. But yeah, naturally we'd want you up and running and moving around but I'm glad that COSA has been creative and at least ensuring that we have this kind of opportunity. So on the screen, we've just kind of shared some of those things that we've found in our own work that have been kind of those standards and how do we move things forward. One of the things that I'm currently reading is Brand Ed by Scheniger and Rubin. I'm so excited to read that book because it talks about telling your story and the benefit of sharing your vision and your mission. So that goes right along. But also, I've also been reading the Ted Dintersmith, What Schools Could Be, and encouraging us to look at things differently. So if you are on Twitter, those are our Twitter handles there. And then just out of curiosity, if you want to look at some of the things that we've been doing, sharing our vision with social media, there's our Lockdale Middle School Instagram account. And obviously it's been down, not a lot to share as of late, but typically when I'm in the building and kids are in the building, I make it a point to post weekly, those kinds of things that we want our kids doing. So.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Heidi, very much. We've got about 7 minutes before our next session. So we'll go ahead and break right now. We'll leave everything up, take a quick pause, and let's be back and ready to go at 10:35. Thanks. Okay, well, it is 10:35, so we want to get started to honor the time of our presenters. Our session on instructional leadership, kind of modeling the work that we are all hired to do, is going to be hosted by Miley Tolan and Rachel George. Let me introduce both of them to you. Miley is the Secondary Teaching and Learning Director in the Lincoln County School District. She was the principal of Taft 712 before she took on that role. And she's currently the president of the Oregon Association of Secondary School Administrators. Rachel George is the principal at Sandy Grade School in the Oregon Trail School District. Rachel also serves as the NASSP or NAESP national rep. So she coordinates our work here at the state level with the National Organization of Elementary School Principals. If you were listening, I mentioned that Maya-Lise and Rachel are collaborating on a new book, part of the Lead Like a Pirate series on women in educational leadership, which will be out hopefully in the spring. Hopefully they'll have some time to talk a little more about that. But we're really pleased to have both of them with us, and I'll turn it over, it looks like, to Rachel, who will start us.
Yeah, I actually think it's Maya-Lise. We coordinated. Yeah. I have evens and Maya-Lise has odds.
All right, so thank you so much for having us today. One of the things that we decided to do for this presentation is try to gear it a little bit towards what it's going to look like for most of us in August, September, I guess it's August, so end of the month, and through September as we're starting to work with our staff in possibly a virtual format with our students, and then moving in and out of that. And what does instructional leadership look like when, for many people, it could be very different than what they have experienced in the past. So we're going to use the framework that's in the distance learning playbook. I'll try to hold my cover up actually. If you haven't seen or heard of this book yet, I highly 100% everything I can say to you recommend getting a copy of this book. It is on back order if you try to get the hard copy, but you can get the digital copy quickly and right to your phone even. And it's just been a great resource. So we're not going to pretend to be Fisher, Frey, or Hattie by any means, but we do have just some key components from it that we wanted to touch base with you today. And then at the end, we will give you time to do some collaboration on what you foresee for your evaluation system and what that will look like for you during this different year that we're in.
Thanks, Maya-Lise. Would also just echo, when you order that book, don't go to Amazon, go straight to Corwin. You'll get it faster. So that's just a quick tip to keep in mind. And then as we go throughout our presentation, instead of talking at you and telling you, which is a lot easier to do, quite frankly, we're actually going to take more of a cognitive coaching approach, by having you reflect and think about applying this to your practice as you're in the building. So just as a disclaimer, that's why it's going to be with a lot of question asking and some reflection built in.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at, one of the things I absolutely loved about this book and for us to really ground ourselves in as instructional leaders is what does that self-care look like, and how do we really put that on the forefront this year? So they actually made it the first module in there, and the things as a leader that we have a responsibility of considering, along with student self-care, because we all have that umbrella when we're making our plans. But what does staff self-care look like? And how do we build in time in meetings for that kind of relationship level with our staff, to give them time to breathe, to make them know that that's really important? The whole staff care also, what does your building culture look like with self-care? Not just the individual professional, but what does it look like for the whole group, for the culture, whether you're all on Zoom or you're in a space. I'll tell you, our administrators all came back yesterday. So we are in a gym. Everyone has a mask, everyone's spaced out. The first 2 hours of that, keeping 6 feet, was really, really awkward. And even though we knew it was coming, not something we had prepared our professional development for. And so talk about pivot in the moment. I pulled everybody together for our PLC training part. And we redesigned it so that we had staff care in mind of not putting steps in place that would cause anxiety. And then what's your personal care look like? So one of the books that I would highly recommend if you haven't seen it before is Balance Like a Pirate. Full disclosure, I didn't read it for the first probably 1.5 2 years it was out, because it just seemed weird to me, and I didn't really need anybody to talk to me about how I should balance better, even though I really did. And I was at the National Principals Conference, and the session I wanted to go to was canceled, and this one was next door and had room, and it was phenomenal. So I highly encourage you to get the book. It's down there at the bottom. But here's what we're going to have you just take about 2 minutes to reflect on. So if you have paper out to write on, when we balance, we really have to understand and be okay with ourselves, knowing that there's lots on our plate. There's lots of things that we have to balance. But when we're in a quadrant, we need to make sure that we are all in. So some things to think about. We all have a personal life. We all have things in our life that we want to accomplish. We have personal goals. Like, I would really like to lose my COVID weight that I've done a great job of gaining and hiding on the bottom half of the screen, not being invisible. So what is my personal goal about that? And how am I going to make that a priority and time for that? Professionally, we all have things that we are responsible for. So as a building principal, what is our goal that we are going to do professionally to grow and to also support our staff? Then we have positional, and we have a lot of positions in our life. I'm a mom, I am a board member of a couple different boards, I am an administrator, and I'm a wife and a daughter. So how do I balance all of that? And when I am wearing the wife lens, am I all in? When I am wearing the administrator lens, am I all in? And so how do we acknowledge that those are there? And how do we make sure that if we are a workaholic, that we are a workaholic all in when it's work, but giving equal priority to the other positions that we hold? And then what is our passion? And are we acknowledging that passion and making sure that we are giving it the time that it deserves? Do you love to travel? Well, right now that can be difficult. So what is a different passion for you to do? And how do you give yourself that chance to recharge? So we're just going to give 2 minutes of time for you to reflect on those 4 areas. And how you can utilize this information as a building administrator.
So the second module in the distance learning playbook that is fantastic talks about the first few days of school. And if you think about when you are in a face-to-face setting, the first couple days of school are vital, right? And you're even looking at the first couple weeks as you're setting up classroom routines, but also building routines. So we encourage you and your staff to think about what does that look like in an online setting. If you think back to the spring, I'm sure you can remember the chaos of teaching kids how to mute, how to online interact, whether that was with discussion boards, whether that was with a live conversation, the list goes on. And so things to be thinking about, what are some ideas and topics that you as a building principal need to have those conversations and facilitate the discussions with your staff? So be thinking about those. Some different ideas might be starting with your norms and routines in your classroom agreements that you build and develop with your classroom, with your students. What CDL agreements you have as a building, that might even be district-wide. For example, like how are you getting signal for attention? What are you doing with your camera? Do you guys have the protocol that your cameras are on? Do you have them that are off? How about accessing materials, or even the turning the work in? You might also want to think about equity considerations, along with how you can be proactive with developing relationships. Regardless of whether you're in a face-to-face setting or a virtual, I think we can all agree on that consistency is a huge key. Teachers often struggle with consistency in a face-to-face setting, and when we're looking at an online setting, it's going to be even more challenging for them to develop that consistency, but it's going to be vital. Recently heard a quote that I hear a lot, but it is really resonating with a lot of folks around, is that through structure, there's freedom. And that's so, so true right now. We really want to make sure that we are creating those predictable, consistent interactions and schedules. So then that way there's no question about really what are we doing? How do I get online? How do I shift through the next couple of things? So why don't you take a moment and why don't you think about what does it typically look like? And especially if you're new to the principalship, which I mean, many of you are, a couple of you guys in this room were vice principals or deans of students in the building that you were in last year and you got moved up, which congratulations. But be thinking about what did it normally look like for the first day of school? And then roll that over to what that might look like in a virtual setting. And then also think about what does that look like in a classroom and what are you looking for with your norms for your staff? And then also extrapolate that out to the first couple weeks. What are things that you might need to think of with your staff, things with students? So take a moment. We'll give you 2 minutes for that. Go for it, Miley's.
All right. So module 3, we move into kind of the intentionality of relationships. We know that relationships are huge in the classroom. We all get that feeling when we walk into a teacher's classroom who has great kind of personal relationships, but we might not see the same instructional relationship. We get the feeling about relationship levels when we go into a classroom that's very, very instruction heavy focused and doesn't have that personal side and those personal relationships. And then we have those classrooms that are professional and personal and instructional, and they just are that package of relationship building between teachers and students. We also get that same feeling when we're looking at building leaders. When we go into a building that has leaders that have strong relationships with their staff, with their families, and with their students, there's a different feeling in those buildings. And so a lot of that just has to do with being in the hallway, talking on the mic at assemblies, walking through the cafeteria, being active on supervision and having those small conversations. Those common areas now, those unstructured times where we build relationship may not exist in the virtual world. And so what will we intentionally do as teachers and as administrators to continue to build those connections? And then how can we track that? How can we look at what that student and teacher interaction looks like? And so in Lincoln County, our first PLCs for the year in all of our buildings are going to be about the student-teacher relationship and what does that look like. And so setting SMART goals around contact with kids so that we can see their faces and I'm not saying in person either, because we know that that might not be possible, but what are some interventions that we can do for those hard to reach students? And we've had some time to reflect on how it went in the fall, in the spring. And so now in the fall, how can we be better based on what we learned? So just take a couple minutes and feel free if you have ideas, if teachers have already been talking, if you've already been planning, how to do that, throw some of those ideas in the chat for other people too. How can we really be intentional? What was that?
Can I hop in here real quick?
Yeah.
So last spring, we had some administrators, dear friends of mine, that really struggled with this relationship aspect because their go-to relationship strategy was always face-to-face. They stayed clear from Twitter. They stayed clear off of Facebook. They didn't do a lot of updating on their website with any blog posts or current events going on. And they struggled. They struggled a lot. As new administrators, I just really encourage you, and that's why I guess I deeply appreciate Jamie and Heidi, been dear friends with them for a while, but their message is spot on. And when Jamie made that comment about Twitter, some of the best PD, along with social media, that goes to also say how powerful relationships are over that virtual connection and social media platforms. So as you're thinking about how families are going to get to know you, I'd encourage you to utilize different video options, different multimedia pictures, different ways to tell your story, because it can't just be a newsletter. It can't just be in paragraphs. You need to be able to really get in front of them and build that personal connection and be able to show your personality. As many of you guys know, it's hard to tell the tone within texts, emails, any of those, but when you really see kind of the light in your eyes and that smile it's very authentic, and that's a huge way that you can continue to keep those relationships building and growing. So I'd encourage you to think about that as you're thinking about relationships moving into the new year.
Great, thank you.
And we'll give you about a minute or two on this one.
Perfect.
So as you're kind of wrapping up that relationship aspect, you know, Elise and I put in the chat a couple different strategies that you could utilize. If you're new to video, we're kind of scared about kind of venturing into that. An easy one is just online read alouds. You literally can set your phone up and just video it from there. Encourage you to double check the copyright and also double check what platform you use. Scholastic was super lenient this last spring. They just wanted to make sure that you weren't putting it out for the entire world on YouTube, but you can always put it down on a closed platform and just send that link directly to your families or house them all within a Google Classroom. So lots of different ways to kind of get your face out there and build that relationship. You can also, if you have an iPhone, Elise introduced me to the Clips app that's just automatically on your phone. That's a great way, if you don't have a green screen, to build in some super awesome videos that kids find really engaging with some neat backgrounds as you deliver just updates or weekly announcements. So really awesome things to be thinking about. So as you're thinking about heading into the new school year, credibility is a huge thing, not just for your staff connecting with your families, but also for you as a new administrator. You know, last spring, I'm sure many folks had MOUs with their unions about not doing any observations, and many actually, in fact, didn't go through the full evaluation process just because of how new and scary it was. And I think that was a great call. But I have not yet heard of any districts doing that for the upcoming school year. So observations are going to be really interesting in an online platform. And whether you're in a face-to-face setting or, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic like online distance learning, I think it behooves you to really slow down when you're new to this position and you're new to any building. So, you know, think of this if you're brand new this year, or if you're going to be brand new to a building in like 5 years. Those first couple months, you really shouldn't be, you should be in classrooms, but you shouldn't be doing any formal observations. You need to be in there developing relationships with your teachers. You need to be cheerleading them. You need to be giving them props about the risks that they've been taking and building that connection so you develop and build that trust. Hey, I noticed this, that was fantastic. Hey, I noticed you took a risk with X, Y, or Z. Hey, when Sally mentioned this, I loved how you pivoted that and you tied it back into what you were talking about. There's a whole variety of different sentence frames you can have, but just being present and being extremely positive and supportive is a huge deal. If you don't slow down, you're going to have trouble speeding up later. That's one of the lessons that I've learned, unfortunately, over the last 10 years as being a building principal. You have to go slow on this piece. And I would say that even more so with this online platform, you know, all my staff is returning this next year. And even though they all worked on distance learning last year and it's the same platform, so there aren't really any huge changes, I know that the first half year really is going to be centered around propping them up, encouraging them, and not just jumping in and going crazy with an observation. So different things to be thinking about. So as you're thinking about online classes and you're thinking about, you know, many of us for sure are going to be in a distance learning model until at least mid-November. How are you going to observe teachers? You know, you might be thinking about how you're going to get into the Google Classrooms, what consistency, how can you develop that routine so then when you hop into the Google Classroom, it's not a distraction to the students or to the teacher. And then how do you build the trust with the conversations at the end? You know, in a face-to-face setting, especially the nonchalant conversations when you're walking down the hallway or you pop into the staff room to use the microwave, you're like, hey, Elise, I loved it. I saw this in your classroom. That was super cool. I'm really proud of you. But now that we're in a face-to-face online setting, trying to make sure that you have those interactions with people are a little bit more challenging. So how might you follow up with them? Are you going to drop them an email? Are you going to drop them a postcard? Which you might chuckle at that, but that has been some strategies that I've noticed administrators have used, and it's actually been really positive. Are you going to give them a phone call? Are you going to give them a text? So how are you going to build that relationship with them intentionally? So why don't you take about a minute or two and think about how are you going to build that trust and street cred? All right, Miss Elise.
All right. So this next one on here, we'll just talk about real briefly. The rest of the modules and the aspects we're going to talk about really hit on what Rachel said. We're in the rooms and we're building relationships. And so what does that look like as we carried it out to the point where we do start the more formal observation and evaluation cycle? While we're building relationships, it's a great time to also be commenting on, hey, I saw your learning target was up. That's great. Hey, I was in your Google Classroom and it was really clear what you intended for the students to do. I love that you had taken a picture of an exemplar and you had that posted in your Google Classroom. Or I noticed when I was in your virtual room that behind you, I could see what the learning target was for the day or what your essential question was. So the things that we saw in a strong classroom are the things that we still need to be able to easily find in a virtual classroom. So it might not all fit on the screen all of the time. It might not always be behind them, but in what platform will we be able to find it? And is it clear where it's at? Does a student and a parent know where to go? One of the things that we learned pretty quickly on was we knew what Google Classroom looked like from the teacher side, but we were having to find our personal kids' logins so that we could see what it looked like on their side. We knew that it sent an email notification, that was great, but we didn't really realize that every time we were adding something at the high school level with 7 classes, that they were getting up to 40 emails a day. Now kids were used to more of that. Parents with the Remind app and everything were not necessarily used to how much we were communicating with them. So clarity comes in all forms, clarity to the teachers, from the teachers to the parents, clarity from administrators to the teachers of what we're expecting to see from them when we go in there, and then clarity for students. What language are we speaking to them in? Are we using teacher talk all the way across to a second grader, or are we making sure that we're differentiating how we're speaking about those learning targets so that it's easy for them to follow? So we'll look a little bit more, and you'll have time to talk with each other about that as we move further through the modules with the evaluation cycle. So Rachel, I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide.
Sounds great. All right, I'm going to minimize my chat box because there were some really good ideas that were going on within there. So we've been having the conversation as an administrative team with our teachers union. They would really like to see what a day in the life looks like for a teacher. They're having some challenges wrapping their brains around it. We're teaching 4 hours a day for all kiddos. So then that way, when we shift into a hybrid model, it just straight transfers right over. We're helping with that transition process. And I know each district is kind of doing it a little differently. But the part that we're really having to dive deep into is like, okay, so your hour of math, what strategies are you going to be using? We don't expect you to be standing up there live streaming for an hour on math, but how do you have that mini lesson? How do you have that hook? How do you provide that opportunity for some turn and talk time, some breakout rooms, some online discussions? How do you have that engagement and then be able to pull them back together? So you, in essence, are transferring that gradual release process to an online platform. We want to talk about how we have that structured. We want to talk about how we're engaging kids and having that facilitation so that way they're just not checking out. You want to have that conversation with your staff. You know, we're doing it district-wide, depending on your district and their approach. If they're not having that conversation, I'd encourage you during the first couple of weeks with your staff to really hash that out. Super powerful if you can facilitate that at the grade level, if you have grade level teams. Some of you guys I know are in school districts that have just 1 teacher per grade level, so that might be a little bit more challenging, but you might look at it as a vertical alignment opportunity. But some of you I also know over on the east side are in some larger schools. Like Maya has a huge handful of teachers that are kindergarten level or first grade. So think about, could that be a great opportunity for them to develop lesson plans together and structure out their day, their time, and really, really put that emphasis on what strategies are we using. And I think it's also prudent to think about strategies, some of our old school strategies, right? We don't need to be super flashy with this, but our tried and traditional, tried and true strategies that we've had in the past that have been effective are effective now. They haven't changed. They didn't go away. So pull those back out. It's a great opportunity to go back down and just really look at the basic and the foundation. You also might want to encourage your staff to really kind of start slow, right? Kindergarten kids might only have the attention span of like 10 minutes versus some of the other ones that are older that can kind of hang for a lot longer. But as many of you guys know, even though in the secondary setting, sometimes it's our go-to strategy to just talk at them in a lecture approach. I'm sure many of you guys found that the engagement level this last spring when we did that was pretty minimal. You know, my husband's a middle school principal, and he has a third within his student population up in the metro area. And they actually took a really interesting approach to engaging tasks, and they did that as a grade level team. They had their reading, math, social studies, and science teachers all work together on thematic units. And so all of the content areas were integrated. They had some incredible projects that the kids were asked to create and to use. And it kind of ties into number 7 on lesson planning. But ironically, they had the highest interactive rates in the entire district, and they had some of the most at-risk populations of kiddos within the building or within the district. So would encourage you not to have limiting beliefs about your students, and also not to go crazy on thinking that you have to do some crazy plans in order to get kids engaged. So utilize the collaboration. Miley, do you want to hop in on this next one?
Yeah, I went ahead and switched it to module 7 while Rachel was talking, because 6 and 7 are so intertwined. Once we get into that engagement part, to really plan proper engagement and to plan the proper tools that we're going to use, we have to be thinking big picture at the same time. So what does that unit planning look like? And so just like she was saying, the teachers were able to collaborate. We kind of have a little bit of a gift with this virtual setting that we're in right now, because we can do we can take some risks and do some of that collaboration that it could be more difficult when we're in a brick and mortar school. And it's allowing us to now think outside the box. It's going to make us better. When we come back to where we get to see kids and we get to be with everybody again, we're going to be better because of the things that we're naturally happen to do right now. But be thinking about your schedule, your internal schedule. Does it allow for peer coaching? As a principal, when we see that there's a teacher who needs some support in an area, you know, we might go cover their class so that they can go and they can observe another teacher. Well, we need to be just as prepared as administrators to be able to step in and cover classes. And so how do we still set that up? All of those great things that we did to allow teachers to observe each other, to learn from each other, that we built time in for, how do we still build that time in? How do we utilize our staff so that we're not canceling a session and the teacher's just giving the video instead? But how do we still have that interaction in all of our classes, knowing that our ultimate goal is to, for most of us, get to hybrid and get to where we're in a safe place that we have everybody back on campus. So how do we just kind of recreate and make that happen? And then what time do you need to build in for collaboration? Is collaboration going to be a key part of your staff meeting time or of your protected time that you allow them grade level or cross teaming or any sorts of plans that you might build in? How can they do that so that they can build stronger units? And then I don't like to think with the pessimistic side of what am I going to do if, but truly, what am I going to do if a bunch of my staff get sick and they're not able to come in and I'm putting subs in? Oh, just kidding. I don't have them. So now where are we at and where am I at as a leader in that collaboration process, so that if it's my turn to go and step in and support student learning and support the staff, that I'm ready to do it. So when they're having that collaboration time, how active are you in it? How involved are you in being in the know? It doesn't mean you're planning it for them by any means. They are the classroom teachers and they are the experts in that. But we need to be in the know now more than ever so that we're able to support them. And that again is one of those avenues that's just going to make us stronger.
I put some ideas in the chat box. Many districts have pushed back their in-service week to be 2 full weeks, which I think is going to be a great opportunity to help set up some of that professional development and kind of front load it. You might look at what your weekly schedule looks like. Ours is Wednesday, where we have district-wide collaboration for all the grade levels, facilitated and supported by principals along with professional development. So lots of different strategies and approaches that you can take to that. So as we're thinking about implementing with whatever platform you're on, face-to-face distance learning, we're thinking about instruction, right? We can't have this wasted time. We can't waste another year with our students. Is how are we going to provide feedback? And many of you guys are familiar with how to use the work and the effect size on feedback. And you want to also ponder, how does that connect back to your evaluation process and the rubric that you have on hand? Many of you guys have either like the Salem-Kaiser variety of a rubric that you have, or you have the Danielson model. Those are 2 common frameworks that are found across the state. As many of you guys are familiar with, over the last, well, actually it's probably been 10 years now since Senate Bill 290 came out with that specific framework on evaluations. But you want to make sure that your interactions and your feedback are always tied to that rubric. Even though that was initially created for a face-to-face brick and mortar setting, it still applies. Don't throw it out the window. So we're actually going to kind of shift into where we're looking at that rubric and really thinking about what are the tangible things that we can see when we're on an online platform. When I was in the building, I shouldn't say when I was in the building because I'm still in the building, but we're like in an online setting now. So in a normal situation, I jot down the different feedback that I've had with staff, whether it's positive, whether it's things that we're kind of working on. I just kind of keep a little list so then that way when you're going 90 miles an hour that you're able to remember the conversations, because if you don't have a great memory, or even if you have a great one, there's going to be little pieces that you forget. And especially as you're building relationships and those positive connections with staff, it's going to be vital. So you might create a list of all your staff, and you might just record that if your goal is to make sure that you're positively connecting with each of them once a week. Make sure you jot down when, where, because you'll also want to track trends. Are you always watching and hopping into their Google Classroom during reading? Or are you looking at math? Or are you always going into the afternoon session? Are you always going into fifth period? Or are you going into first? Dynamics within the classroom change dramatically from class period to class period, morning to afternoon, and also within the content area. So track it, keep, just kind of keep a little running list. It really helps inform your next steps. Whether it's in a conversation or what you're going to really hone in on with your observation when you get to that part of writing some of the stuff up, or just building the relationships. You also might want to have a conversation with your HR director or whoever's in charge of that at the district office level about what the direction is regarding formative and summative evaluations. We still haven't received ours yet in my current district, so I'm not sure if we are going to be doing the full-blown summative evals for folks that are on cycle this year, or if we're going to do observations. Regardless, even if your district has an MOU and you get away from the evaluation process this year, I would still strongly encourage you to make sure that you're active and in classrooms and using it as an opportunity to build relationships and really help develop that culture of instructional improvement within your building, because it's a great opportunity. And just like Miley said, you're going to be stronger when you come out of it and you head back in, because these aren't skills that are going to be done in isolation. You can still carry a lot of these things back in and really make your practice powerful when we're back in a regular face-to-face non-pandemic time.
Great. Okay, then the last one that I'm going to move the chat box here that we will take a look at is just exactly what Rachel was saying, that we will come back and we will be better when we come back. And so how are we being very intentional about the work that we're doing right now, being work that transcends distance learning, back to face, hybrid, possibly back to distance? Like, how are we making sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck on the amount of time that we're spending? So preparing for all the models of learning, not going overboard. I told everyone in June that we spent a lot of time in June, as did everybody in the state, on getting ready, knowing that guidance was going to keep coming out. And I said, we are really engaged to this hybrid model. We like it. We are flirting really hard every single time we see it. We might even be talking about marriage, but we are not married to the hybrid model because we still have 6 weeks and we have no idea what is going to come out in the next 6 weeks. So we didn't want to go all in on that plan, not thinking about we still need to be prepared for if this happens. So the same will go on throughout this school year. And then how are we prepared to observe in it? So it's just all the things that we've been talking about. Do you have a link for every one of their Zoom sessions so that you aren't having to email them like, hey, can I get the link today? Like, where is the one document? One of our high schools had their master schedule for distance learning for all, had the link right on it for every one of the class periods, so that just take it right out of Google Classroom, you knew right which one to go to, and it was the same one. It was very easy for me to pop in, for the principals to pop in. So that was great. For assistants to pop in, how are we utilizing our instructional assistants differently this time than maybe we utilized them last time? So all key things to be thinking of. So what we're gonna do here is give you some time to reflect. It'll be about 5 minutes for you to just kind of look at that. Was a lot that we went over. And then we're going to just give discussion time, if I can get the slide to switch. So now with all of that being said, as Rachel was pointing out, that eventually we're going to have some form of evaluation or feedback that we're giving. So this is in Lincoln County, we use Danielson. I realize not everybody does, so hopefully you have access to yours, or you can be thinking about what those components are. And I'll put this one back up in a second. Just be considering, and this is kind of what we want you to just be making notes of in our 5-minute reflection here, how frequently will you enter virtual classrooms? It cannot be the one time when you're required to give feedback to them or observation, just like in brick and mortar. That's not going to be okay, and it's not going to be okay for you as a leader, because it's not something that we're all used to. Our look-fors are still new to us as well, so we have a big responsibility of practicing of feedback in a virtual classroom and learning what that looks like. How will you model instructional practices virtually? How at staff meetings are you going to be intentional about modeling, taking your avid practices that you've learned and making them digital, so that they see you trying, even if you're not good at it? And what is one takeaway that you have that you could do right away? So I'm actually not going to go back to Danielson on there, because I think you kind of get the gist of what we're looking at. But think of these reflective questions, and we'll spend just 5 minutes on your thoughts and ideas for this.
All right, so our 5-minute reflection time is up. So Elise is going to kind of lead us into some group share out. And I know many of you guys have your cameras off. Feel free to keep them off and talk, or I'm going to leave it up to Elise to help facilitate.
I think we're probably good to stop sharing at this point and run with the chat box. Let me see what, I think I only had.
You just had,
yep. We don't need that. I do just want to share this quote as we go into that planning part. Fred Litzenberger was a coach at U of O. I think now he's at Northwest Christian University, but I thought of this all spring. I went to a basketball camp when I was in high school, and he was teaching us how to pivot, and said it was like the most underrated necessary move that we had in the game, that it was a game changer. And so every time he would pivot, he'd say, change of pace, change of direction, works in everyday life. And you would say it back. And all spring, that was just like constantly in my head. I thought he had no idea how much that was going to be a game changer for us with pivoting. So I'll go ahead and stop share. While I'm doing that, I was looking down at my phone while we were doing the reflection time. My nephew is a first grader in Arizona, and today was his Meet the Teacher meeting. And my sister just sent me a picture, and he's on his Zoom screen, and his face is so happy. They are excited too. And so it's going to be different, but we're in this game-changing profession for kids. And so it was just heartwarming to see that super cute picture of him. So, all right, let's hear out on what some of your ideas are on those questions and ways that we're going to get into classrooms. I think you can unmute yourself too. Oh, perfect.
And someone did ask if we're going to share our slides, and we will for sure share our slides, yes. And you know what, Elise, I haven't asked you this, so sorry to put you on the spot. Her admin staff did a great compilation of all the modules, and that actually, if you wouldn't mind sharing with the group, that might be a great kind of condensed version of this distance learning playbook that they might be able to utilize with their staff during those first couple weeks as just an example.
No, thanks. I'll talk to Dr. Gray about that and see. It did, just so everyone knows, we bought the book for every educator in our district. And right now they just have the digital version. But yesterday we put the principals in teams of, I think they were in like teams of 4, and they went through and they made 2 slides each for the playbook and presented them. And it was really great. So, all right. So Christopher, were you the first one to unmute?
Hey, sure. I can share out there. For visiting classrooms, I'll tell you what we did in the spring and what worked. We had a shared Google Sheet where all of the teachers by day put in when they're having live sessions. And so that gave us as administrators an opportunity to go in and see, how that worked with our schedule, and we could pop in at their classes. We just asked all teachers to send us the Google Meet invites to our calendars. That way we had those available and we could see what was there and we could just jump in. We tried to do it about once a week for each teacher that had a live session. But just as importantly to see the teacher, it was also to see the children and just to say hi to everybody and make contact with them. Modeling instructional practices is a big challenge. That was one thing I think where we lacked in the instructional piece. However, I think I saw in the chat too that, you know, we made a lot of sample videos for new technology, how to use portions of Google to increase your teaching ability, increase your access, to make it easier on yourself. And so we did a lot of those things and introduced some new software, some new applications that way as well. You know, we used Screencastify to make videos for students and kind of some how-to videos, you know, do this, and, you know, you can do this. And I anticipate something similar this year. And then a takeaway that I had was really setting up the expectations for the comprehensive distance learning, what that should look like for each classroom and for hybrid teaching.
Great, thanks for sharing.
Son, did you have some?
I was going to say, piggying back on what Chris just mentioned, I'm going to give a shameless plug for Loom. LOM is that to me, anyways, in my experience, that was really good. Better than Screencastify, just wasn't as glitchy. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But I think that's the one thing that as administrators, we're really going to have to dive into is really how are we going to communicate with parents. I was a teacher last spring and then dived right into this head first. Probably flopped into it. Anyway, so just the biggest thing for us is just how are we going to communicate with parents, and how are we going to engage them in the process, and how are we going to engage the kids. I think is going to be huge with all of this. As far as jumping into the digital platform, a lot of our new teachers are tech savvy, but not necessarily tech proficient. And so I think that that's going to be a huge thing for us in terms of professional development, is how do we get them on board with how to use technology and make them feel comfortable with actually looking at themselves when they're making videos and things like that. So I think that that's going to be vital for a lot of the young teachers and some of the veteran teachers as well, is how do we get them comfortable with utilizing technology in this manner. So
love that distinction between tech savvy and tech proficient.
Mm-hmm. You know, Jasmine in the chat box mentioned Flipgrid. That's been a huge game changer for us. We introduce our staff every year with Flipgrid, whether we're face-to-face or any online setting. And we also have done a lot of virtual assemblies and sharing out for like our PBIS assemblies, our different virtue winners each month through Flipgrid. And families are pretty comfortable with that, and lots of opportunities for student voice with that embedded within, along with Seesaw, lots of different resources.
So can I ask a real quick question as far as accessibility to technology for the parents? So I'm gathering, I've had to use everything from, you know, snail mail all the way up to Zoom meetings and everything in between. Are the parents, I guess, concentrated in one form of technology over another in your guys' area?
Yeah, good question. Many years ago, and I think the advice still holds, I was given the thought that whenever you communicate a message, you need to do so in 5 different mediums, whether that's email, hard copy flyer, postcard, website, or however. And I think that that's still applicable to our setting and situation right now. And depending on your population of families and also the age demographic, it's going to vary. You know, a lot of middle-aged women are typically on Facebook. Hope that didn't offend anybody, but that's kind of the truth, right? And you don't see a lot of the younger families necessarily. They're more Instagram oriented, while maybe not many are on Twitter, and it's more educational. But you could inventory, especially being new to a building, inventory your families about where they want the communication to come from, what mode is best. Align it with whatever your district offers. Typically there's like a district-wide communication source, whether that's Parent Square or Remind or Constant Contact. But definitely spend some time, ask families, but I would also encourage you to just copy and replicate that same message and put it out in 5 different spots. So then that way you do encompass everybody and you're not leaving folks out. And always remember to translate for the population of families that you have too.
Yeah, we ran into that. You know, when we first started having our virtual parent nights, our buildings would have them once a week, and they would back them up with Spanish speaking. So they would do it in Spanish, and then they would repeat the meeting in English or vice versa. At the beginning, we didn't have a whole lot of families that were signing in. Last night we did one, granted it was district-wide, we had 283 families that signed in for that meeting. And we were afraid our Zoom wasn't gonna hold everybody. And then I was afraid I wasn't gonna be able to share a screen, and then SpongeBob was loud, and it was, because the district Wi-Fi was down, so I had to go home. So, but the consistency, we got super consistent of when our virtual parent meetings were. Once a school picked their virtual parent meetings were on Thursday, they got bigger every single week because they knew every Thursday at 6 o'clock, there would be something, even if it was just the demonstration of the video. And they were really, sometimes they were only 30 minutes, but they were every time. They'd have teachers present at them, principals would present at them. One was a community partner presentation. So it took a lot of work, but we had better turnout in those than we ever had at a parent meeting at school, secondary speaking.
What are some other thoughts that you guys had as you reflected on entering virtual classrooms or also instructional practices and how you might support those?
Should have put this on Facebook. Everybody wants to share their opinion on Facebook.
True.
Yeah, no joke, right?
Oh, believe
Sorry.
me, after the 283, I was on it last night. Just, what do you say about me?
Sorry. I didn't
No,
just
but
put that
you
on.
know what? I appreciate you bringing that up because you need to have thick skin, and regardless of what decision is made, you're not going to make everybody happy, right? And as a new building leader, even as one, you know, that's going into their 10th year, it's challenging, and there's times where those stones and those arrows that are thrown at you hurt, especially when you're trying to really do right by all of your stakeholders. But at some point, you just have to turn it off. You have to say, I know in my heart I did the right thing, and I'm doing the best I can. And then you just need to zone it out. You will make yourself sick, literally sick, if you try to hit 100%. You just won't get there. And quite frankly, I've told my staff, I know when they say stuff on Facebook and I don't want to know. If I want them to have a conversation with me, I'll reach out. But it's easier to be like a keyboard warrior than to have those courageous conversations. And I'm not going to engage in some of that other stuff. So I've like drawn boundaries and lines, and I'm very cognizant about what information I take in to keep myself healthy, and to also make sure that I have positive views of all of the kids, and I don't pull in what their parent just ripped off on Facebook towards my staff or to other people.
And Rachel and I do differ a little bit on that. And we've talked about this before. I am very, very on watching what they say, because I'm going to use that to call them. And so it's not going to go unchecked. It's not an argument when I call. I don't let them know I've read every single mean detail that they put on there, but I will call and say, hey, I heard, or I saw that you weren't very happy about this, or you had some questions about that. Or I would just invite them in, like, hey, I saw on Facebook, I was wondering if you had time, if we could meet up and have a conversation. And they usually ended well, because they're frustrated and they're venting, or then they'll come on, I didn't vent. What I won't do is I won't engage back on Facebook with them. I will engage on the phone with them, but not through I'm not going to argue. They're not in a place if they're writing that, and I definitely am not either. But I will make note and give a call.
So just putting this out there, sorry. Just putting this
Okay.
out there. So 5 things when I was, I've been in education for 19 years now. And anyways, so when I was the union president, talking about thick skin, there's 5 things I asked my staff to do, and also with some of our new teachers, I told them there's 5 things you want to communicate when you talk to parents, and talk to parents, and talk to staff or talk to anybody. Start with the positive. What's your problem or issue? What are the facts? What is your, not mine, what is your proposed solution? And end with the positive. So anyways.
You friends need to write a blog post about that and put that out, because that's going to be a fantastic approach, regardless of what situation we're in. So you should write on that. It's good advice.
Oh, right.
And I'm just very time. My Elise and I can help you.
Yeah.
I just gotta get through this year.
I know.
You will.
Yep.
You all will get through that. That's a given. You will get there. So, and you know, as we wrap up, because we're right about at our time, if you have questions throughout the year about this, about anything else, Elise and I are very accessible. Chris has our email. I think you have our email because it was on the big list group email regarding the Principals Academy. Feel free to reach out. We're both also active on Facebook and Twitter. Call if you need anything. We'll put our phone numbers in the chat box. These are our cell phones. If you need anything at all, please let us know. We're here to support. sarcastically joke that my first year as a principal was the worst year of my life. And actually, it's probably not sarcastic because it's really genuine, and it was. And even last year in a distance learning model and my husband going through crazy stuff, last year wasn't as bad. Know that you will get through this, and you'll get through it, and you'll be a heck of a lot stronger for it. So just embrace it, lean into it, and use it to learn, because you're going to do some amazing things. And we're really thankful that you guys took on this challenge, because we really need strong, amazing leaders right now. And we know that you guys can do this, and know that you can't do it alone. So you do need that one at work.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Milese.
Yeah, and just before you get off there too, he did just put those, the five parts in the chat box. So people were asking, I want to make sure they see those before they do something else. Thank you guys so much.
You don't need to give me credit. I don't need none.
You should. It's your stuff. That's good.
I appreciate Rachel's comments about having a thick skin. I will add, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from my first mentor when I was a building principal was sleep on all important decisions. And I think that that's even more applicable now that we're in this virtual environment, that there's very few things, life, fire, safety, that you need to respond to. Most things can be put off for 24 hours. And where your inclination is to respond to a social media post, it's best to probably just sleep on it, come back the next day, and it won't have nearly the same impact it had that you thought it had when you first were presented with it. You'll save yourself a lot of headaches. I can reflect on a recent response I made to a group chat. And after I sent it, I realized it was a group chat and not an individual chat. Ran into one of my daughter's bedrooms, saying, how do I get that back? How do I get that back? It was like, Dad, it's gone. You'll never get that back. So just be patient, lead with grace, and have a good night's sleep. And I think you'll come back the next day better than you left the day you were in. So thanks again, you two. We'll take, looks like about a 7-minute break, and we'll start our last session of the morning at 11:45. Have a great day. Titled Preparing for the First 100 Days. Our presenters this morning are Lynn Jackson. Lynn is the principal at Astoria High School in the Astoria School District, and Lynn is the past president of OASSA. For any of you who participated in some of our online Zoom meetings for the different departments, Lynn did a great job of leading those last year, and we'll be supporting them as we kick them off in October of this year. Corey Gobb is the principal at North Marion Intermediate School in the North Marion School District, and is the Willamette Region rep for OESPA members. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Thanks for joining us today. What should we do to get ready for the first 100 days?
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Chris. Greatly appreciate it. I do want everyone to know that as Corey and I have talked about this, one is that those first 100 days are going to look very, very different this year than they typically do. So some of the advice that we're giving may not necessarily be applicable for this year if we were to have done this last year, but we are going to try to really focus on some things that we have felt to be of highest priority, independent of whether we're on site learning or if we're in a distance learning for all model. And so those are some of the key things that we're going to focus on today. And Corey, why don't you kick this off for us?
All right. Hello, everybody. Corey Gobb. I'm the Willamette Valley OESPA rep and proud principal at North Marion Intermediate School here in North Marion School District. And just like Lynn said, there's going to be things that we'll encounter this year that wouldn't be a typical year for sure. And we're hoping, though, that some of the resources that we provide, you'll be able to use as the year goes on, share with, and you'll have access to this slide deck here, share with colleagues. But we really want to get to the heart of what we've kind of galvanized around as 3 key components: culture, communication, and relationships. And those are things that will matter no matter what the conditions are around us in the world. But we know that really those 3 things are going to be paramount and just seminal to the work that we're going to do with kids and families, and just some things that you really would want to focus on. We do have some slides with information, and we want to share some of those things with you. But that bottom piece, that relationship, as most all of you know, I'm sure, is going to be the centerpiece for the work that we do. We talked about goals for a 100-day entry plan, and there's kind of 4 pieces there, and really the heart of that is relationships, authentic relationships, positive relationships, being the champion, the standard bearer, the flag waver for every one of the kids and families in your school district and your teachers and staff, having high expectations and clearly communicating those, and then also just looking around at the landscape, what's needed, a needs assessment, and just that creating that condition of positive culture of learning. Going into this this new year, that will be the drumbeat that everyone will need to have as they're leading a school, is that whatever it's looking like outside, you know, we've got this, everybody. We're going to be able to take care of this together based on those positive relationships that we foster.
So as we see here, one of the key things is creating that strong relationship, and as we move forward, making sure that staff understand who you are and that we are authentic in what we're trying to accomplish. One of the things I appreciated what Corey said the other day as we were chatting about this is we truly need to be real with them and not necessarily a facade of perfection that we have all the answers, because as we move into a school year facing the challenges that all of us are going to be facing, there's no one individual that has all these answers, but we can provide that strong foundation and develop those relationships with authenticity to realize that we can collaboratively and as a community be able to achieve some pretty great things in adverse situations. So making sure that we create this culture of excellence, culture of community and growth, but this culture of community, making sure that we all have the belief that as we work collaboratively together, we can achieve great things, not only in your building, but as a district and as a state. And I was very appreciative of COSA last spring, allowing us to rally around and link arms together as building administrators to have that sense of community. And that can extend certainly throughout this organization as you hopefully are networking with today's cohort of new principals.
This slide really speaks to the idea of a highly effective principal facilitates, models, and leads. And when we talk about culture of excellence and community of growth, we are leaning into our teachers. We want to lean into our staff. The concept of the expertise is in the room is very true. And I think that when we look to those that are around us, and we are real with them, and Len mentioned about that, and that's the construct of being, you know, real is better than perfect, and modeling that in all that we do, leaning into teachers, assuming their positive intent. I can't tell you how many times that construct has been valuable for me as an administrator. When I know that people are doing the best they can with what they have, and my role is to come alongside them and help them grow and improve and learn from them as well. That learner mentality is crucial.
One of the things I would like to extend to you right now, I'm going to pose this question, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a number of individuals willing to share. But as we went through distance learning last spring, and you were either able to observe your building principal or other administrative colleagues, what are some things that we can do to provide the ability to create strong relationships with our staff, with not only our teachers, but also all of our classified staff, whether they be secretarial, custodial, instructional assistants? What are some things that you as a budding administrator, first year administrator, saw that you're planning to implement in helping to engage, interact, and connect with the whole school community? Thoughts?
Our building, between the principal and the assistant principal, basically every other week, we did weekly roundings with our entire staff. We divided up the group. And so every week we were making a phone call or a Zoom and just asking the same 3 or 4 questions. You know, what's going well? How can I support you? Or are we supporting you? Do you have a shout out for someone else who's doing something great? But I found through those conversations, we were really able to keep a good pulse on how our staff were managing and dealing with things, and we were able to quickly get their needs met. Yeah.
So please take note that we'll have some individuals that are offering some advice in speaking up and others in the chat feed. So please take note of both of those.
Yeah, we had a great comment. We connected with our classified staff who mostly were at home, not working, held weekly virtual staff meetings, more of a check-in, how's it going, sharing updates, sometimes playing a team building game. I can't tell you how many times that was valuable when we were working last spring remotely, and really trying to find some different ideas this year to do that same type of thing in some different ways. Oftentimes people wanted and needed information, and will again, and other times it was just to see faces and to see smiles of people that they're used to seeing every day inside of a building. It's a great comment.
Yeah, I would follow up with Corey's as well. I found that to be very beneficial. We had our staff meetings, certified, classified, everyone invited, and they were theme-based. And they started off really easy, purple and gold, our school colors, and then they got a little bit more wild and crazy as the spring went on, just to give us an opportunity to see each other's faces. But one thing we did also, which I'm not sure will be viable this fall, but I allocated a half hour on a one-on-one individual conference with each certified staff member. And it was something where at the end of the year, when we did some reflection, I was touched by how many times that came up. That it was oftentimes I was reaching out to them, yes, as a certified educator, but oftentimes the conversation was about how they were navigating the role of being a parent and an educator at home at the same time, and trying to balance all of those pressures. And they were able to speak to me and see that I was at home with 4 children as well, and trying to navigate that, a senior who was trying to graduate and navigating disappointments with that. And so again, going back to being authentic and offering yourself up that way really has helped deepen some levels of trust. And that's going to be key as we head down in these uncharted territories educationally.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I wouldn't let that slide by, and I'm going to share that widely, that practice, because I think that people want that sense of connection when we're not together, but we're together in it together. But nevertheless, those one-to-one or those small group meetings can be so powerful. Connecting with people, just we're humans first, and then our roles and professional responsibilities second. Jasmine commented, we had strong leadership team with teacher leaders and key classified staff to help guide the work. And Christopher, yes, weekly grade level, virtual meetings with video. We shared positives and told stories and updated everyone on home visit results. I think those are going to be key again this year. And then adding that this year they're planning to do the same. This week, in fact, they had a virtual and limited in-person staff meeting, but it was good for everyone to make contact and hear where we are with plans. Their admin team divided up the staff list and made phone calls to every staff member to check in on them throughout the closure.
Let me pose one more question. As we think about that third bullet on the slide where it says develop deliberate and intentional lines of communication to nurture relationships, give opportunities to lead the way. How do we balance authenticity in acknowledging the challenge of the situation we're facing while still providing positive leadership? Thoughts on that? Authenticity, acknowledging the difficulties of the reality that we're facing, but still providing positive leadership in approaching those challenges. Thoughts? What have you seen work for you?
For us, you know, most of us as administrators have students in the building, children in the building. And so, you know, sharing with teachers our own struggles from the parent side and letting them know that they're doing a good job, that, you know, we've experienced, oh, your class with my child, you did this great. And just giving them a different perspective too, because they may not hear those positives from parents. How often does a parent call, or did they call during our closure, for example, and say, hey, this was really working great online. And so giving teachers another perspective was good. And then just sharing too, being honest, like you had said, what did I write down? Being real is more important than being perfect. And so being real and saying, listen, I'm struggling too, reaching parents, reaching kids. I know the time and effort you are putting into it. So keep up the hard work.
Nice. Thanks, Christopher.
I think that's just going to be key as we move forward. For us to not acknowledge the challenge that we're going to be facing, then that almost makes it seem like we're not in touch with the reality of what we're facing. But at the same time, there's got to be hope and optimism and not despondency. So I continue to focus, reflect on that. I don't have all the answers, but I'm fortunate enough that I have children in the high school and able to really pass on those compliments that I have towards the instructors of my children, but also the compliments I do here. Thank you, Stephanie, for your comments on those team and individual meetings and those one-on-one buy-ins.
Yeah, I think that we can see that that authenticity and those relationships are so powerful, and I think it goes a long ways to building trust. Lyndon mentioned that word, and that's just foundational to everything. And I think that you probably already found, or you will find in your administrative journey, is that you need people around you that you can go to, that you can lean into. And this next piece addresses the team concept and the idea where we want schools where staff and parents are beating down the doors to get in. They're excited about coming back to work, whether that is going to be virtual or when we're back into the buildings. And they've got a strong leadership team that they can go to, knowing that you're not the one that's going to have all the answers, and needing to develop a team and find those key people that you can go to develop and foster the type of environment where people are going to, kids are excited to come back to school the next day, staff are excited to come back to school the next day, and where there's those nice components of professional collegiality and positive assumptions, so important in our work.
I would also, going back to this concept of creating a leadership team, I would encourage each of you to make sure that you have that leadership team established, that you are very intentional on who you put on that leadership team, whether that be department heads or other building leaders. But I want you to consider things such as, who are those that can be champions of ideas? Who are those that are creative with ideas? Who are those that you may need to have on that team to help be proactive in supporting their efforts of buy-in, because sometimes they struggle and they can be influential in a negative aspect of going the other way. So having that leadership team to throw out ideas and to use them as a soundboard and as a repository of other great ideas is going to be key, especially this year, as we're doing things that have really never been done before.
Nice comment from Brian. We did the same as what Stephanie said. Also, admin went out to visit, and also high-risk students sent cards and Dutch Brothers cards to the staff. And Lisa added, district administrators sent postcards to staff members with a short message of appreciation. These key relationships with leadership teams, I see those people as being those folks that can be extensions of the school as a whole. So delegating and building leadership capacity in others is so crucial. And what are the ways that you can look towards folks who have leadership potential capacity, or are there folks that you know, they're quiet, they sit back, and you know, building those trusting relationships, you're able to find out this person doesn't speak up at meetings a whole lot, but boy, they're going to make an amazing leader, and I'm going to have them on my leadership team. And so operationalizing those people to do some of this outreach that we know we're going to have to do, you know, is just stellar. And then I look for that too, not just within my teachers, but across the staff, you know, kind of a vertical look at and trying to kind of flatten the hierarchy. Because some of the best ideas that we've had for our school and improvement of school in a variety of different ways have come from some of the most unexpected places. And when those surprises emerge, it's awesome. And then, you know, how can we capitalize that? How can we build on that more? So just always trying to think about where might that next spark be, and how to fuel that.
We do have a question from Mo about the magic number on a leadership team. And I'm interested for input. I'll say what I have done is that I've had department heads or other designees from departments represented on the leadership team, classified staff, as well as some at-large staff members. But one thing that I have done, so that magic number is typically for me in a staff of about 55 staff that are in the building every day, 70 total. We usually have somewhere around 7 to 10. But I also want you to know that I send the invite of the meeting to all staff. So there are some that are expected, have a strong invitation to be there, and there are others that are the whole entire staff is always invited to attend if they have an interest or input that they would like to provide, so that you don't have a feeling of an inner circle amongst your staff members, that they recognize that there's always an invitation for input and participation.
Yeah, that wide, broad range of voices and choice is so valuable. And I mean, that is such a challenging but important piece, Lynn, that you mentioned. Is there's not anybody that you want to feel, just like when I taught multiple grades, and I really just kind of wanted every single student in the room to feel like they were my favorite. And but everybody thought that too, right? That was just kind of between us. And so, and genuinely giving love to your staff is so important. And I can see in the comments ways that that's been happening. The surprise yard signs during a stressful time, the postcards. There's a new book out called Teachers Deserve It. And it's from Kids Deserve It group, but that's the type of thing that is going to go a long ways in not just professional and work and collegiality, but it's edifying as a leader. And there's a lot of days that really draw on the cup, so to speak. And so any of these types of investments that we can make in a relationship are valuable.
So this next slide talks about getting to know your staff well, not only by their job description, but their strengths, a strength-based approach. What do they bring to your staff that you can leverage for the maximum benefit of not only the staff, but students and families? I really appreciate, I've been in education, this is my 22nd year, 14th year, in administration, but I still remember what my cooperating teacher in my student teaching experience said when he told me, get to know well your custodian and your head secretary, and how true that is. They know so much about your building. And so knowing what individual strengths are, how they can help support rolling out your vision and helping to support logistics as well as philosophy.
Yeah, so relationships with intentionality. We've talked a bit about this. What are the opportunities for professional development that are embedded? Staff meetings and creative gatherings. We rarely host staff meetings that are not some form of professional learning in my school. Most of the communication during typical years has been, a weekly news and notes, email, sometimes a quick stand-up meeting. But usually if I'm gonna bring everybody together, I really want it to be something where people leave with something that they can embed into the classroom, into practice. And so looking for those opportunities. And then also for professional learning, who are the other people in the room that can help deliver that? Oftentimes, you know, there's a teacher that has a promising practice and I want to have them, and I'll shoulder tap them and, hey, can you stand up and share what you've been working on? And we'll do these pop-ups, pop-up PDs. And so even if it's just something really simple and quick, you know, teachers are looking for innovation and ideas and creativity, and it's a creative endeavor, the art of teaching. And so anytime where you can have a colleague share with another colleague and and you be the facilitator of that, that can go a long ways to making an impact on kids and for families. And you know, you could cross a continuum of ideas that could include everything from you know, math practices to social emotional learning practices across the gamut of what happens in the learning day.
So one of the things, again, we are talking about, at least in my mindset, how we're going to proceed forward as principals this year, which will be your first year in this capacity. But also, I just want to recognize some things that we have done in the past in a more traditional setting. For example, each year we have a staff barbecue residents, and families are welcome and everyone gets together and we have an enjoyable time getting to recap the summer and look forward to an upcoming school year together as a staff community. And that's not going to be a possibility this year, obviously. So I have two questions for you as we think about how can we have those staff meetings and creative gatherings. One, I'm just kind of doing a survey here. How many of you are planning on having staff work in the building, or are they going to be working remotely if you are in a distance learning model? And secondly, what are some ideas that you have about creating that same outcome as a barbecue would with family and friends? What are some ideas that you could do to create that sense of community as we kick off this school year? So share out those ideas. That would be great. In building from Stephanie, yes.
We're doing, staff have the option to be in the building. We are at the baseline phase. So if they're able to work remotely from home, then they can. And then for their kind of our barbecue event, our committee that's helping with the reopening plans wanted to do a virtual meeting. And so they're gonna do like a virtual barbecue happy hour, whatever you wanna call it, with breakout rooms. So there'll be like a room where if you just wanna talk and recap summer, you can. If you wanna play games, and then different people on the committee are gonna be running those breakout sessions with those kind of fun party games.
Thank you, Maya. Just to let you guys know and make me feel older, Maya was actually a student of mine way back in the day. And I was not only her teacher, but her track coach. She was very talented in many things in her life, so I'm sure she's going to do a great job.
And when you talk, there's times where I just can imagine you standing on the corner of the 400 saying, "You've got to go, you've got to go, you've got."
Yeah. I can still see myself screaming at you as you come around that corner. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like there's a lot of folks trying to be in the classroom. Staff will have a choice in the building.
So just to summarize this, as are we kicking this off, make sure, as we have talked about already, and I know we're spending a lot of time on this, and you may be thinking, well, I really need to know the nuts and bolts of what do I need to do my first 100 days. This is such a unique year that we have intentionally chosen to spend a lot of time talking about relationships, intentionality of creating those relationships. Because, for example, right before this meeting, I am clicking submit pretty soon on my building operational blueprint. And that's your nuts and bolts for this upcoming school year, is what's that operational blueprint going to look like? So really making this a successful year, those relationships are going to be vital.
This area speaks to community engagement. And so now, not being able to have that back to school barbecue with our families, or that bark dust spreading Saturday with parents on the playground, what are the ways that we are having opportunity to connect remotely? And in some ways, we had a lot of conversations last year about what are the things that we want to leave in the building when we come back to it, practices that were either antiquated or not effective. And what were the things that we found, that we discovered when we were away from the building and doing remote learning, that we want to bring back, that had efficiencies in them and had relevance to, you know, a new way of interacting, and the currency of technology and all those types of things. And so as far as family engagement, I think it's a lot, context is everything. And so communication with families is just paramount. I'm in a community right now where Instagram is probably not the go-to for most of the families, although that's changing because we have younger families having kids, younger to me anyway. It's a Facebook community. I've got colleagues who rarely use Facebook, but Twitter is their mode of communication with families. And so having an online presence, a virtual presence, and just that consistent way of communication, getting a consistent feedback loop with families is really important, because just like when we engage with staff, we want to know their thoughts, ideas, feelings. We of course want that with our families, and just now so much more important than ever to know that. Those home visits and those interactions over a Zoom or a Google Hangout face-to-face, they're really going to be digital face-to-face. They're really going to be important. And so having a repository and a tool belt of ways to do that are really important. I'm curious too, I'm posing a question about what are the tools that are being used right now? What are you finding relevant? What are you anticipating using this year?
Well, I would like to, Corey, just tap into a little bit from the previous discussion with Rachel and Maya Elise, in which they were talking about 5 different modes of communication or avenues of communication. I would continue to encourage each of us to do that, so that we're sending out the email, we're sending out the post on Instagram or Facebook, that we're sending out the text remind. So kind of that variety. But one of the things that I have found very valuable this summer are those parent nights and the virtual parent nights. And while we may not be hitting all of our families at that time, we're having those in Astoria, we're having them in Spanish and in English, and to hear perspectives directly from families. So it's not just a one-way communication, because that's really one of the biggest challenges, is getting the information from our families, not necessarily to our families. Hearing from them is going to be important this year too. And I found those virtual meetings to be pretty valuable. So with this particular slide here, I just strongly encourage you, and I know you probably are doing this, but make sure that you don't feel it is necessary to create your operational blueprint on your own, to solve your scheduling issues on your own. This afternoon, or right before this meeting, I had a conversation with the middle school principal, and I said, I'm struggling with this particular issue. I've never dealt with this before because of the remote model that we are going to implement. And I said, what are your thoughts? What are your plans to do this particular situation? So please just make sure you work in collaboration with your district team, avoid working in that silo, and seek out resources around you. And I don't mean to just put the shameless plug here, but COSA is a great avenue to reach out to fellow administrators throughout the state. Last year's meetings were very valuable to me. They were, 1, they provided ideas, but 2, they provided assurances to me, like, okay, I'm on the right track here. I'm doing what I should be doing. And so those assurances can be great. Those of you who are secondary principals, I would encourage you to form strong relationships with other principals in your conference or league, because you're going to be working with them often. And there are going to be times, I'm speaking optimistically, when we're all back and competing in co-curricular athletics, that there may be issues that arise. So start building those relationships as well with those fellow principals outside of your district.
Yeah, for sure. We've got another link coming up about some networking with Facebook groups and things like this, but always ask the question. I just think that if you're not sure, seek out those resources around you. COSA, again, absolutely excellent resource that nationally recognized as a go-to around the country. And then also your ESDs. In Oregon, we have the benefit of ESDs, and there's a lot of resources there, oftentimes untapped resources. And so I would seek those out as well. If you're elementary level, middle level, and you feed up to a high school, engage with those other administrators in a vertical way. There's really nothing more powerful. Oftentimes, we in the elementary level will work elementary school, but one of the best things that we can do for our kids and families is understand where they're going and collaborate with those fellow administrators around us. Even in a larger district, though, that may be a little more challenging, absolutely worthwhile the time to reach out.
So with this data-informed leadership, this is going to be key, especially, I'm going to speak to this as a secondary administrator. So, and Corey I'll pass the baton on in just a little bit, but especially heading into this next school year, make sure you're aware of individuals who are not on track to graduate, individual credit earning assurance plans for any incomplete that they may have from the distance learning model from the spring. These are going to be things that you're going to have to proactively address, just as a deadline, that September 30th deadline of having all the credit earning assurance plans dialed in and presented. So making sure that you understand where you are as you head forward into this school year is going to be important.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just a bit of a ratcheting with our elementary and middle school. It's those, especially those transition years. So your kiddos that are leaving 5th grade, coming into kindergarten, where are they at? Knowing what your teachers know, and that's going to be one of the best things to do this fall in pre-service, is to have those discussions. And qualitative anecdotal data is a valuable thing, particularly this last year, where we know that so much of the discourse and instruction feedback cycle happened in a non-traditional way. And so if there's a way to kind of catalog and capture that information about where students were when school closed in March, and where we were when we ended the school year, parent surveys are going to be powerful in that way too. There's just things that we're going to need to kind of think about differently, those same types of data points, but making sure that information is in your hands and that you're revisiting it in a team-based scenario.
So with your budget, that is also going to be something unique to this particular school year, potentially. For those of you who are administrators at the secondary level, where are you with your high school success funds, your Measure 98 funds? Is there a rollover budget coming from last spring? Just to speak on my particular building, when things shut down in March, many of my expenditures that I had planned for Measure 98 did not happen. So I have funds being rolled over into this next school year. How can I utilize those funds to support our learning process, not only in remote models, but also hybrids or on-site? And make sure you become familiar with your budget, past expenditures that you can anticipate being different this year, whether higher or lower because of the uniqueness of this year's spending model, and making sure that if you have any questions, this could get you in more trouble quickly than anything else except for an ethics violation. But making sure that you ask the district finance director if you have any questions about a particular budget item, that you are reaching out and asking those questions beforehand. Don't wait to make the mistake.
It's a great opportunity for a proactive meeting with your budget finance director or your CFO, and just sitting down with them and an hour with a budget director is going to be worth a semester of coursework. And so sit with them, have them walk you through the budget, their perspectives. Great professional learning for you. It's not something that is, it is a context-based component of administration. And so anytime that you can look into that, look into past years' budgets, see trends, and then the forecasting piece and discussion with the finance director and superintendent is just going to be really valuable. It is definitely something that you want to have well known. Oftentimes your front office administrative assistants will have good information about it, and so that's another person to ask, you know, what are our common expenses for the year? What does it look like over the last 3 years? And those types of things. This slide talks about classroom budget and things like that, and general expenses, and that will probably all look different. I was talking with our office manager this morning, and we were talking about the amount of paper that we're going to have to order. That'll be different this year as we start off. So just those types of things and those types of meetings to get some of that checklist rattled off would be helpful for budget. There's a good question that came in about, does the head secretary help with the budget and balancing? So thanks, Mario. It kind of depends on your school. I have 2 office managers, and their column is budgeting and receipts, and she works basically like a micro finance director for my building. I was really fortunate. A colleague down the road, different scenario. Everything goes through their district office, and the secretary doesn't really have any hands on it. It's really the administrator's role for that. What's your experience, Lynn?
That's something where play to the strengths of that individual. At the high school level, I have 4 secretarial staff members there. The head secretary, who is my professional secretary, also is the individual in charge of finances with regards to all district, grant, and those accounts. But I do have some ASB accounts that navigate a little bit through an activities director and athletic director secretary, but really set up some conversations with that office manager, because they will become very versed, and they may be very much so. If you have an experienced one in your office, you're very fortunate. They will know those trends. They will know where those sticky notes are placed on your budget. What I mean by that is, you may have this 12-digit number that represents an account, but you can't remember what that account is actually paying for in reality. So knowing that this particular line item is for expanded options, or this item is for the online platform that you purchased, those types of things are going to be essential. But yes, I've had my office manager's been the one that's been the driving force with the district accounts and grants.
Most districts have a digital interface for finance and budget, and that would be something to get familiar with when you make that meeting with your CFO or office finance director, district office person, if maybe there's a training that they can walk you through. There's a lot of information that it lives within the budget that is really behind the scenes that can, it's a powerful tool for a school, and it can make a big difference for kids, but it really just takes some time getting to know it, getting to know the trends and ways to work it, so then you can make a big difference for kids with the fiscal pieces that we're entrusted with.
I do want to just quickly state with regards to your ASB accounts that you become very versed with those at a secondary level. You may have as many as 100 ASB accounts that you're managing. So you're familiar with those, the processes of expenditures for those, and that you're following those very closely as they will be audited in your building. I believe it's happening 2 times a year often. So make sure that that's all dialed in with regards to ASB.
The next,
take this one, Corey.
Sure. The next 2 slides are about facilities operations. And so just making note of the facility that you're coming into. If you're in a brand new school, or if you're at a school like mine that was built in 1962 and is undergoing bond renovation this summer. So pardon the hammers if you hear any, but you know, being the person that is, in some ways I view myself as a custodian of the school, and just wanting to be the caretaker for all the parts and pieces of it, the people within it and the building itself. And so just taking note of some of those bullets there as far as ideas that you would want to be aware of, things that you would want to pitch out if it's time for them to do so. We've got a number of things that we've gone through because of our bond work that we've been able to heave ho that we didn't need, but then a number of things too that have been, they're kind of sacred items and they're sacred to the community. And so we've found some ways to kind of rehome those into a different way, but making sure that you're communicating clearly with any of that type of activity is really important.
I would also just extend that to your office, because you may be entering an office where files are full of 1987, I'm not exaggerating this, 1987 files that are no longer applicable about curriculum from 1987 and those types of things. So make sure you clean out, and organize your office as well. This next slide really is something that we're all going to aspire to, and hopefully as soon as we can safely re-enter into our schools, but making sure that we are the champions of first impressions, not only in our interpersonal relationships with those who enter our school buildings, but also with how our school building looks, whether that be a brand new building, a renovated building, or one that's older, that we do our best to make sure that it is not only orderly, safe, clean, but that it's one that's welcoming and invites school pride in student work, in achievements, in staff members, just making sure that it is visibly appealing to all those who come in.
I think most people are aware of the huge body of research behind how an environment impacts a system and an organization and the human psyche, and of course a learning environment. So when an environment is warm, welcoming, and vibrant, that transcends across the experience that people have. And I really appreciate, Lynn, you saying the champions of first impressions, because it really does go a long way. And that that sense of wanting to be in a place where there's a school that the kids are wanting to come back every day and the teachers are excited to be there. The environment plays a huge part of that.
This one we've talked about quite a bit already, as we were talking about creating opportunities of motivation and recognition from this past spring. And so I don't want to be too repetitive, but at the same time, I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of those interpersonal relationships, and recognition and motivation is vital to that. This is a no-brainer. If you walk down the hall and you saw something great and you have a positive thought come to your mind about a particular staff member or student, share it. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes we get so busy. No, I need to head down to my office and get started on this particular task. Take a moment and share it. And that will go a long way to continue to build those relationships.
We created positive teacher referrals. And so we had positive student referrals happening. And so those were student to student, or teacher to student, or even a parent to student, and we would post those and celebrate those. But then we started positive teacher referrals, and this is a staff to staff kudos and shout outs, and just trying to create a variety of streams of recognition and motivation, because everybody needs a little pat on the back, and especially when it comes from a colleague or from somebody that supervises you. I know it's always good to know where you stand and how you're doing, and especially when you do a good job on something. And so we created these we would do videos weekly where the teacher would get recognized, and we display it over the school. And it was just a great way to get other kids to know other teachers and to build some trust between people. Any of these motivation and recognition types of things go a long ways to getting back to being real and being authentic and building that trust that's so important.
And that visibility as well. And I know that's going to be difficult for us as we start this particular school year, but making sure that we are visible when we're in the building and that we're in those common areas, greeting students, welcoming them, making sure that they know they are appreciated as an individual. But this fall in particular, that we are creative in how we can make ourselves visible virtually and in our community and in our school groups as we are going to be kicking off, at least many of us kicking off a remote learning model.
Okay, and this is our last piece of 5 points. It's called the instructional leader, and probably at some point in your application process that term was brought to bear, and you either had to write to it, speak to it, and now as administrators, all of us are trying to live it and improve it every day when we show up for kids. And you can see some of the bolded terminology there, and just hopefully that'll be something for you to take away. Authentic and positive relationships, ensuring school improvement, high expectations that are defined and articulated, those needs assessments that's ongoing, and a positive culture.
So as we have just a few minutes left, we have about 10 minutes before we wrap up. I'm going to share a quick story with you and provide one more invitation. I had been a building principal for approximately 5 or 6 days when there was an athletic code violation at a football campout that required us to suspend approximately 30 high school football players and the first 3 games of the football season. And that led to a situation where I've been a building principal for 5 or 6 days, and now I've got 4 news crews standing outside the district office building interviewing me. I did not have all the answers at that time, nor would I have all the answers necessarily today, 9 years later. And so I just continue to provide that invitation of, if you have questions, please ask them. And that invitation is for right now, but also an invitation in the future. Ask them to reach out to us, reach out to other colleagues as we've already discussed. So are there any questions of points that you wish we would have discussed that we didn't as we head into this very unique school year?
I think there's too many questions to articulate, really. Don't we all have just so many unknowns out there? But do appreciate what you guys have shared. And yeah, it'd be nice if I could send you an email at some point during the year, either of you, and just say, hey, we've come across this. What are your thoughts on this? That'd be helpful to me.
I'm putting email addresses, etc., and I'll put my cell phone in there as well.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. I'll do the same. And I'm really always learning. And so I think all of us are that are in this business. And I think that anytime that schools can collaborate, share ideas, share things, it's going to better all things for Oregon kids. So that's what it's about.
Any individuals from the COSA team? Principal Gary, I thought I saw Jamie on here still. Maybe he's checked off. Anything that you wish we would have presented or we should have presented that we missed? Okay, well, at that then, again, you have our contact information. We may be reaching out to you just as much as you may be reaching out to us. So thank you for the opportunity to chat with you, reflect upon some of the things that you've presented. to us as well as us talking to you. And I'll turn that back over to you then, Chris.